Cultfigga TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao of Revolution. World War III update. Iran versus Trump world news. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all, well, we've been having some technical difficulties. I'm going to try to get us through this live, get up y'all some revolutionary information. Let's get right to the content. Salute. So just good dinner, man. Salute, family.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
As you know, on the morning of April 25, Mali was subjected to one of the largest attacks by terrorist groups. It is reliably known that almost 12,000 militants took part in this attack. The militants received such a powerful offensive fist after the so-called coalition was created, which included separatist Tuareg forces and units of the Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin terrorist group, associated with al-Qaeda. As a result of coordinated large-scale offensive actions, the militants managed to capture the strategically important city of Kidal, in the east of the country, and launch attacks on key facilities in the capital Bamako, and other major cities of Mali. It is noteworthy that, simultaneously with the offensive actions, the militants also organized several terrorist attacks in Mali, to eliminate the military and political leadership of the country. For example, during the terrorist attack in the city of Kati, the head of Malian intelligence, General Modibo Kone, and the country's defense minister, Sadio Kamara, who was one of the main architects of building allied relations between Mali and Russia, were killed. It is noteworthy that right after the death of Sadio Kamara, the Malian army panicked and stopped resisting the advancing militants, even in the most important areas. It was the inaction of the Malian soldiers that allowed the militants to capture the town of Kidal, in eastern Mali. However, unfortunately for the militants of terrorist formations, thanks to the courage and professionalism of Russian soldiers from the African Corps of the Russian army, the situation in the country did not get out of control, and the first wave of attacks from the militants was repelled. Furthermore, the Russians even managed to prevent a coup in Mali, as a result of which the country's president, Assimi Goïta, was able to retain power. Against this backdrop, Mohammed Ramadan, a spokesman for the Tuareg rebels, called on Russia to stop helping the Malian authorities. It is noteworthy that he made this appeal while in France. According to him, the Tuareg do not treat Russia and the Russians as enemies, and that they're—
I already told y'all that those African nations that was revolutionary wasn't kissing the ass of the NATO and the white supremacists, was standing up straight. Putin would side with them and would not leave them in a time of need. And as long as you're willing to fight for yourself, Russia will never abandon you. They just proved that. They just proved that in Africa. They just proved that in Mali, because the Malian soldiers fought for themselves and Russia stood with them. Any other nation would have been overthrown, but not the Malian army. Neither would Burkina Faso or Niger.
Their main goal is to permanently expel Russia from the Azawad region, in northeastern Mali, and overthrow the current regime in Bamako. Furthermore, right after that, a representative of the Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin terrorist group, Abu Hudhaifa al-Bambari, announced that the militants had allegedly completely surrounded the capital of Mali, Bamako. At the same time, he stressed that the local people will be destroyed if they resist the militants. He also called on the Malian soldiers to lay down their weapons and surrender as soon as possible. At the same time, it is worth noting that the information that the militants allegedly surrounded the capital of Mali has not been officially confirmed. Against this backdrop, many experts have suggested that the militants are deliberately spreading rumors about the encirclement of Bamako, in order to sow panic among the Malian soldiers and the population.
See, when this happened in Libya, because the Libyan army collapsed, Gaddafi was killed. The Russians wasn't in the country like they are in Mali, but the Malian army, the soldiers, they have proven to be brave soldiers. See, this go a long way with Putin. Putin already came out and said, okay, we not going to abandon y'all. Y'all just don't have the Russians doing all the fighting for you, and we got you. You see? But they not going. The U.S. not going to stop, because this is the global battlefield. They're losing Iran, so I knew it. I told you this going to happen. So now they're trying to switch it to Africa. You see, switch it to Africa because it's energy there. They need to go there and steal all their oil, all their gas to supplement what they losing in the Middle East. But Russia already was ready for that bullshit. The U.S. gonna lose everywhere. The whole global battlefield, they're going to lose this war. The only place they strong at is here in the Americas. That's why they was able to slap Venezuela like that. But the Cubans are ready. The Cubans say, God damn it, they're going to have to kill millions of them before they go out like the Venezuelans.
It is noteworthy that Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Georgy Borisenko also did not confirm the information about the encirclement of Bamako by militants. According to him, the situation in Mali's capital is calm at the moment. At the same time, he acknowledged that clashes are still ongoing in several districts in Mali. Moreover, a few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed that Russian military personnel stationed in Mali successfully repelled an attempted coup. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the number of attacking militants was 12,000. Their main objective was to capture key sites in Bamako, including the presidential palace. However, the African Corps of the Russian army, even despite the enemy's numerical superiority, managed to inflict a crushing defeat on the attacking militants. As a result, the rule of the legitimate government, headed by Assimi Goïta, was preserved in Mali, and the mass death of the civilian population was prevented, Russian Defense Ministry said. The official statement says that during the fighting in Mali, Russia actively used its combat aviation. In particular, we are talking about the Mi-8 and Mi-24 combat helicopters, Su-24 bombers, and Pacer attack drones. In total, Russian aircraft have carried out more than 30 combat sorties. In the first hours of the fighting alone, 200 militants, 70 pickup trucks, and more than 100 motorcycles were destroyed.
See, that's how ISIS was able to take over Iraq. That same type of force, but the Russians were now. The same attack was able to take over Syria, but the Russians was on a total different side of the country, you know. And the Syrians didn't want to fight for themselves, so Russia said, fuck it, we're not finna do all y'all fighting for y'all. And Al-Qaeda overtook the country. What the world don't want to talk about is Africa nation stood up straight. The African nation stood up straight. And this is and Ukraine was helping Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They don't want to talk about that. But the Africans, and I'll tell you, there's only 3 free nations in Africa: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These are the only nations that's free. All that other nonsense people talking about in Africa, that's bullshit. I don't care who. Even South Africa, not fucking free.
Simultaneously with this, Russian military doctors continued to provide medical care to wounded and injured civilians. According to official reports, in total, during the fighting in Mali, the African Corps of the Russian army destroyed 2,500 militants, 7 mortars, 152 motorcycles, 102 pickup trucks, and 2 vehicles that the militants used for suicide attacks. As for the Russian losses, sources confirmed that during 2 days of fighting, the African Corps of the Russian army lost 1 Mi-8 helicopter, along with 2 crew members. Against this backdrop, it is also worth noting the statement from the Russian intelligence service. In particular, Russian intelligence has confirmed that Britain and France were actively involved in training terrorists to carry out a coup in Mali. Furthermore, it is reported that Ukrainian, French, and British military instructors not only trained militants for attacks on Malian cities, but also coordinated their actions.
Sure they did. That's what they do. Getting their ass kicked right now.
My dear friends, let me remind you that in 2022, due to Russia's actions, France and its allies withdrew their troops from Mali. Back then, this resource-rich African country turned completely towards Moscow. It is obvious that the West still cannot accept such a humiliating defeat.
2022, France was kicked out of Africa. 2022, what was going on in 2022? Oh yeah, the Ukraine-Russia war started. NATO got in Russia business. France tried to harm Russia, and that's when it all started. Russia was like, okay, cool, global battlefield, and start humiliating them in Africa. This is all a part of that war. Now they're getting humiliated in the Middle East, so they're trying to go all in, capture Russian soldiers. They want Al-Qaeda to capture the Russian soldiers, behead them, put that shit on TV, humiliate Putin. That's what they wanted.
Defeat in Africa, and is doing everything to expel Russia from Mali, using any means, including terrorist groups. However, unfortunately for the West, the African core of the Russian army did not allow the terrorists to retake Mali. It is worth noting that even many Western experts have admitted that it was only thanks to the professional actions of Russian military personnel that Mali did not fall into the hands of terrorists. Despite the militants' numerical superiority and the panic among Malian soldiers, the African core of the Russian army managed to hold all significant positions and airfields in the country. Thus, the African core has once again proved to the whole world that it is the real pride of Russia on the African continent. My friends, I am absolutely sure that after these events in Mali, Russia will further strengthen its military presence in this African country, and force the terrorists to flee the captured town of Kidal. As for France and its so-called allies, they should accept the fact that they have lost Mali once and for all.
They don't want it. Shame on the U.S. using Al-Qaeda to try to kidnap women and children and try to humiliate Putin. These people are sick. While they playing White House shooting. See, that was to distract y'all. See, while they was talking about terrorists shooting at people in the White House, they wanted people to wake up to Russian soldiers captured in Africa, beheaded, Putin humiliated. That's what they thought they was going to be talking about, but it didn't. Salute, family. It didn't happen. The Africans stood up straight to Al-Qaeda and NATO.
Statistic that did not exist before.
They ain't going on.
The sands of West Africa are once again soaked in blood, treachery, and the unmistakable fingerprints of foreign intelligence meddling. Overnight, the nation of Mali, a sovereign country that dared to throw out the French neo-colonial machine and pivot toward Russian security cooperation, was rocked by the single most ambitious and sophisticated coordinated terror offensive the Sahel has witnessed in over a decade.
Tuareg rebels celebrating their takeover of the northern Malian town of Kidal.
Cities under attack by jihadists and rebels, Russian mercenaries in retreat, and a defense minister killed in his own home.
Hundreds of armed fighters linked to Al-Qaeda tried to storm the barracks on motorcycles. In Sévaré, around 600 kilometers northeast of Bamako, gunfire echoes near a camp used by Russia's Africa Corps mercenaries.
This was not a random uprising of disgruntled tribesmen.
Mercenaries.
This was a full-scale, multi-front military blitzkrieg targeting the capital Bamako, the critical garrison town of Kati, and the northern strongholds of Gao, Kidal, and Sévaré, all executed with a surgical precision that stretches the imagination of what a so-called ragtag jihadi group can achieve. We are talking about a force estimated by the Russian Defense Ministry and the Africa Corps at approximately 10,000 to 12,000 fighters moving in synchronized columns using suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices to assassinate a sitting defense minister, and nearly reaching the presidential palace itself. This scale of operation does not materialize from cave-dwelling militants. It requires satellite-level intelligence, massive logistical supply chains, and a green light or active engineering from state sponsors. The primary victims of this carnage were not just Malian soldiers, but the nation's defense minister, Sadio Camara, the very architect who severed Mali's military ties with Paris and opened the door for Russian forces. He was killed alongside his wife and 2 grandchildren when a high-yield car bomb leveled his residence in a blast so powerful it rewrote the geography of his neighborhood.
It's happening in war. They're killing Russian generals in Russia, so you got to understand they're going to attack your leaders like they're dealing Iranians. Your people can't give up. But the media is trying to pretend like this is so humiliating for this high ranking. This is war, real war, not fake war that the U.S. been fighting. It's real war. Generals, everybody can go, but you got to hold on. That's the point. Russia's proven to the world. You don't give a damn about you. Next man up. That's what happens in battle.
Meanwhile, the Russian Africa Corps, the Kremlin-controlled successor to the Wagner Group, found itself heavily outnumbered, reportedly by a staggering 6-to-1 ratio, and was forced into a tactical retreat from the symbolic northern city of Kaidal, ceding ground to an unholy alliance of Al-Qaeda's Janim franchise and Tuareg separatists. These are the horrific headlines, but the real story is the invisible hand guiding the operations. Before we dive deeper into this labyrinth of colonial plunder, intelligence agency death squads, and the reawakening of a multipolar Africa, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, even if it's just a dot or a flag emoji, to represent the Sahelian resistance, because every interaction pushes this truth past the corporate algorithm. Subscribe and ring the bell to support honest journalism that refuses to sit in the pockets of Washington, Paris, or Tel Aviv. The sequence of events and the sheer quality of the enemy's fires betray a classic proxy warfare doctrine perfected by the West. How do you explain the logistics of moving 12,000 militants across the harsh terrain of the Sahara to hit 4 major cities simultaneously? The Russian defense apparatus in Moscow has directly accused Ukrainian and European mercenary instructors of training these militants, pointing to the recent influx of Ukrainian special operations forces eager to open a second front against Moscow's interests anywhere on the globe. But the rot goes much deeper than Kiev. We must look at the familiar triad of destabilization: the American CIA, the French DGSE, and the Mossad. It is a matter of documented fact, not conspiracy theory, that the US was aggressively negotiating an intelligence sharing deal with Mali before the attacks, demanding drone overflight rights that would have mapped every inch of Bamako's defenses. The same US intelligence apparatus has a long, sordid history of cultivating jihadist assets to bleed their geopolitical rivals, a script they perfected in Syria, where they funneled Tau missiles and logistics to moderate rebels fighting shoulder to shoulder with Al-Qaeda's al-Nusra Front against the Syrian Arab Army. Now, in Mali, the same formula is being applied, weaponizing Takfiri extremism to topple a government that refuses to bow to the dictates of the West. The French intelligence service, DGSE, was already caught red-handed in August 2025 when Malian counterintelligence arrested French national Yann Vezelier, a DGSE operative, along with 2 Malian generals in a foiled coup plot directly backed by Paris. When the coup failed, the strategy shifted from a silent knife in the barracks to 1,000 suicide bombers in the streets. To understand this rage, we must confront the historical crime scene. To grasp why France, with the backing of the occupation entity and the American deep state, is so desperate to crash Mali back into chaos, you have to follow the money trail of uranium and gold. For over a century, France didn't just colonize Mali, it surgically extracted its soul, treating the nation as a private vault for the French treasury. Even after the so-called independence, the criminal architecture of Françafrique ensured that every ounce of Malian gold, over 70 tons annually from more than a dozen mines, and every chunk of uranium destined for France's nuclear reactors was sold at a fraction of its market value, enriching Parisian elites while Malian children starved. The French nuclear giant Orano, formerly Areva, operated the Falia deposit under contracts that were deliberately disadvantageous to Mali, securing the energy future of Europe on the backs of impoverished Africans who saw zero benefit. Mali, like its sister nations Niger and Burkina Faso, finally woke up. The military government of Colonel Assimi Goïta took the unforgivable decision to reclaim national sovereignty, a sovereignist economic policy that kicked out the French ambassador, expelled French troops from Operation Barkhane, and demanded a fair price for Malian resources. This was the ultimate sin in the eyes of Paris, setting a successful example of defiance. A stable, secure Mali, charting its own...
That's why every time they say Iran is the #1 sponsor state of state terrorism, all those congressional black shoe shiners should be ashamed of themselves when they know it's France. When they know France is the #1 sponsor of state terrorism, they are sponsoring the terrorists in Africa. It is France doing it to keep them people up under their bondage. France been more imperialistic than Britain. France is somebody that the world need to be looking at and pointing the finger at. These bastards has been stealing and killing in Africa forever and all over the damn globe. Every time you look up, France somewhere in the Middle East. But these is the #1 sponsors of terrorism is France. But the congressional black bootlickers, they never say that, but they talk about Russia. They talk about Iran, but they call themselves African Americans. But these bastards never speak up on anything going on in Africa. They're not allowed to, unless they're saying, let's hang and lynch Gaddafi or something like that.
Own course is a mortal threat to the French neo-colonial project, a domino that could and already has sparked a revolution across the alliance of Sahel states. Therefore, Mali had to be broken, just as they attempted to break the Syrian state by unleashing a hydra of jihadist militias. A fragmented, terrorized nation cannot negotiate uranium prices. It can only beg for French counter-terrorism bailouts that come with chains attached. In the aftermath of the betrayal by the West, Mali turned east. The Russian Africa Corps stepped into the vacuum left by the withdrawing French forces, transforming the security landscape. Unlike the Western forces who played a double game, the Russian contingent, though facing overwhelming odds in this recent ambush, has been instrumental in training the Malian armed forces and providing tactical air power. When the massive offensive hit Bamako on April 25th, it was the Africa Corps' Mi-8 and Mi-24 attack helicopters that scrambled from Kadi Air Base, flying 21 combat sorties to strike enemy columns. Their Su-24 aircraft carried out 6 sorties, delivering 8 devastating strikes, while Inokodet's precision drones hunted down enemy vehicles. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that over 245 militants were neutralized in these blistering counterattacks, targeting their troop deployments and logistics, a move that ultimately prevented the jihadists from seizing the presidential palace and decapitating the state entirely. While Western media gleefully reports the tactical withdrawal from Kidal as a Russian fiasco, the sober military reality is that the Africa Corps, massively outnumbered, fought a defensive action for over 24 hours while completely surrounded, negotiating a temporary exit to preserve force integrity rather than allowing the Malian government to fall entirely. This is exactly the kind of foreign military support that terrifies the ancien regime. Effective, uncompromised by a desire to loot resources, and premised on ensuring the survival of the legitimate government of Mali. This brings us to the deeply uncomfortable question of the occupation state and its Mossad mercenaries. The synergy between French neo-colonial intelligence and the Mossad in Africa is an open secret. They share a common tactical platform: chaos. In recent months, several Iranian nationals and allied business figures have been actively targeted or kidnapped on Malian soil. A clear signal that the axis of Tel Aviv and Paris is trying to dismantle the emerging Tehran-Bamako axis. 2 French spies, Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris, recently faced death penalty trials in Iran for precisely this connection: spying for Mossad and plotting regime change. The same espionage networks operate in Bamako. An intelligence assessment published by the Russian Foreign Service draws a direct line between Western-backed terror cells and the attempts to suffocate the alliance of Sahel states, a tripartite grouping of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso that has evicted Western military bases. The Global Terrorism Index confirms that the Sahel now accounts for over 51% of worldwide violent extremism deaths, a horrifying statistic that did not exist before the Western stabilization missions. Are we really to believe that Islamist groups who emerged and multiplied exponentially during the US NATO occupation of Libya and the French bombing campaign, operate without the tacit approval or grooming of the very intelligence agencies that profit from forever wars. The attack on April 25th, labeled a coup attempt by Russia, utilized Stinger and Mistral manpads according to battle reports. Sophisticated man-portable air defense systems that jihadists cannot build in Tuareg workshops, but which we have seen flowing unchecked from the arsenals of U.S. allies into the hands of Takfiris ever since the Syrian proxy war. The tribal, social, and community fabric of Mali is being weaponized as a theater for this great power struggle. The Tuareg separatists of the Azawad Liberation Front, fighting for an independent state, share little ideological DNA with the Salafi jihadist brutality of JNIM. Yet they have formed a tactical marriage of convenience because both have been manipulated into sharing a common enemy, the central state that is currently aligned with Russia. This is classic divide and conquer. The French colonial masters historically utilized the nomadic Tuareg communities as buffers, and today their intelligence agency sees their separatism as a fulcrum to shatter Malian territorial integrity. The JNIM, meanwhile, has swelled its financial coffers to monstrous proportions. Recent investigations reveal the group has a full war chest after collecting over $50 million in ransom for the release of an Emirati member of the Dubai royal family kidnapped near Bamako. The role of certain Arabic states in this crisis is profoundly suspect. Why does extremist violence thrive in regions where vast amounts of Gulf petrodollars flow into unregulated Salafist madrasas? Is it a coincidence that after decades of the war on terror, an al-Qaeda franchise now has better funding, intelligence, and armored vehicles than some national armies? The movement of 12,000 fighters toward the capital cannot happen without regional safe havens and the blinking complicity of those who control the borders. The Malian foreign minister did not mince words when he recently accused a neighboring country, widely believed to be a Western-aligned North African state, of supporting terrorist organizations to cripple Bamako. We are witnessing a generational pivot point. The struggle against Western hegemony is no longer confined to the streets of Tehran or the mountains of Lebanon. It burns in the Sahel. Just as the Lebanese resistance defied the occupation's mighty military machine and forced a humiliating withdrawal, the resistance in Mali, both the state military and the societal will to never return to French slavery, is being tested by fire. The terror operation in Bamako was not a religious mission, it was a punishment mission. It screamed, "Dare to be independent and we will send 12,000 demons to your doorstep!"
Today, first, President Putin of Russia spent nearly 2 hours on the phone with President Trump today, giving him a pretty forceful warning that if the United States and Israel restart this war against Iran, that there would be, quote, dire, extremely dire consequences. More on that part of the story in a moment. But first, forget Taco Tuesday. Trump always chickens out. That's what that stands for, taco. Trump always chickens out. The new word of the day is nacho.
I like nachos.
Nacho. I know you love nachos, but this is so far, and nacho stands for not a chance Hormuz opens.
I don't like those kind of nachos.
Yeah, I don't either. But that apparently seems to be the case. Nacho, not a chance that Hormuz opens. Just a few hours ago, according to Axios, President Trump rejected Iran's proposal to open the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. has prepared a plan for a short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran. So is President Trump trapped in this war with Iran? According to reports from Washington, the president is getting desperate about this. He met yesterday with energy CEOs, notifying them that this blockade of the strait could go on for a long time, no end in sight. And he posted this on Truth Social. Iran has just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. They want us to open the Hormuz Strait as soon as possible. as they try to figure out their leadership situation, which I believe they'll be able to do. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Trump. So is that delusional? Is that true? What about the real possibility that the United States has already lost this war? I want to read a remarkable post from the Moon of Alabama this morning. He wrote, quote, even if bombing resumed, there's little evidence that would alter Iran's decision-making process. Quote, the U.S. has lost its war on Iran. Not even one of its strategic goals has been achieved. All its military tactical actions intended to disarm Iran have failed to reach their aims. By taking control of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran delivered the checkmate. So the U.S. has lost, if you listen to what he just wrote. Damn. And then Secretary of War Pete Hegseth spent the morning being grilled on Capitol Hill about these contradictory statements that we've destroyed Iran, they're totally decimated, but somehow they're still controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that Iran is somehow a nuclear threat, but then admits Iran was not close to nuclear weapons, and we only bombed them because of their ambitions. Like, they don't have any nuclear weapons, they don't have any nuclear capabilities, but their ambitions were enough to bomb them. Here's what he had to say, watch.
In a way that
so they haven't
never have it.
So they haven't broken yet. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet for all of the.
Well, their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material.
Reclaiming my time for
a
quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of.
Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before.
You're missing the point.
So,
what is the point exactly?
Sorry. Can
you unpack that?
We needed to go to war with them in February to bomb ambitions. How do you bomb ambitions? I'm so curious.
But what we were told, though, that their entire nuclear program was decimated, but they were told this Operation Epic Fury was in order to further decimate them.
The ambitions only, because there was no military establishment or nuclear establishment anymore. We had already 6 months before.
Yeah, just the ambitions.
Just the ambitions.
Just the ambitions were decimated.
It's like okay.
So is this what winning looks like? Congressman Seth Moulton said is it winning when Iran had closed the Strait of Hormuz? Like, it doesn't make sense. Watch.
So do you call Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz winning?
Well, I would say the blockade that we hold that doesn't allow anything to come in or out of Iranian ports.
Okay, so we've blockaded their blockade. So they blockaded us, and then we blockaded their blockade. That's like saying, tag, you're it. Or, if President Madison had said, well, the British just burned down Washington, but don't worry, we're going to burn it down as well.
Good point. No, we're going to do it on top of what you just did. So trying to unpack all of this. We've got a great panel of guests joining us here on the show today, Colonel Daniel Davis and Colonel Douglas McGregor, both to try to unpack the day's drama. Welcome, gentlemen, to both of you. I want to start, Doug, let's start with you. We saw President Putin on the phone today warning President Trump in a 2-hour phone call that if this escalates again, if we go back to this war, U.S. and Israel, that there would be extremely dire consequences for the region. Do you think that we are slipping back into a kinetic war?
You could certainly make that argument, Clayton. And I think, judging from what's gone on during testimony and some of the things that have been said today by President Trump, certainly seems as though he's opting for door number one, which is to go back and repeat the performance of the previous weeks in the hopes that he's going to get a different outcome. Obviously, all of them need to go back and carefully re-examine Mr. Netanyahu's talking points before they recite them to check whether or not there's any logical coherence. So I think they themselves are rather confused right now. They're trying to put a happy face on the dead rat that they've got on their hands. I don't think it's going to work, but that's where we are. And I think that President Putin probably, I haven't seen the readout either on the Russian side or the U.S. side, but I suspect he's probably warning him that the implications go far beyond Iran, all over the world, frankly. The implications are now global. The absence of fertilizer guarantees that in 5 to 6 months, you've got perhaps several hundred million people who are not going to get very much to eat. And I think that's probably the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Fertilizer is down to almost zero. In fact, even here in the United States, the Department of Agriculture sent over a letter signed by various corporate farmers as well as individuals saying that our own farms are at risk. You've got people that can't afford to buy the fertilizer. It's simply too expensive now. We don't stockpile fertilizer the way we stockpile oil. And, they're worried about farmers going out of business right here in the United States. In fact, bankruptcies among farmers is up by 46%. Now, President Trump received that letter back in March. So this is not news to him, but it doesn't seem to penetrate, doesn't seem to have any impact. He's obviously listening to people around him who want to bomb, want to attack. And I don't see how that's going to produce a different outcome.
Yeah. Colonel Davis, we saw gas prices yesterday hit their new highest they've been since August, $4.18 a gallon. And then Axios reporting just a few hours ago, as I mentioned in the intro here, that President Trump has rejected Iran's offer and saying a blockade will stay until they get this nuclear deal. So maybe you can unpack that. What will this blockade look like then over the next few weeks? Are we talking months?
Well, the real issue, that is apparently what they're talking from the U.S. side, that they think they can go 2 or 3 months from what I can gather from various sources. But that keeps that just looks at the Iranian portion of this. Number one, our blockade is clearly not foolproof, despite the claims made by the Secretary of War and President Trump today. There's lots of evidence that some Iranian controlled ships are still getting through there, but it's still not that much. But they're ignoring the other half of this equation, that all of our GCC allies, or the majority of them anyway, are also still blockaded, and they're not getting anything through. I think only if I'm not mistaken, UAE or Oman is getting a few out because they're on the Gulf of Oman side. But that's it. And so we need to be taking a look at that, because that's what's driving the higher price in oil. See, I don't think that we can sit here and just say, yeah, I'll just, play a game of chicken and see if the pressure I can put on you is greater than the pressure you can put on me, and who's going to blink first, because it affects the entire world. And I mean, we see in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, all over the place, and including the United States. It's driving the price of literally everything up, and it's the absence of things like even helium, aside from the eating part. It's affecting our ability to make chips, which means everything that we have, all the economic activity, is being set up to have a real problem. And these are talking about medium-term things that are already baked in, that already are going to be in short supply. So we've already got a problem here. And then the question is, how long can we go? The other question is, how long will Iran go? Because they initiated the drop site news today, was reporting that some of the Iranian sources that they're talking to say, listen, we're not just going to go on forever like this and saying you can just keep this blockade on us and this price picking up, because at some point we're going to take matters into our own hands and end the blockade one way or the other. So it's not just whether President Trump is going to reinitiate combat. By having the blockade, he may prompt Iran to finally say, all right, the price of the pain got too high. Now we're going to take some action.
It reminds me of Dumb and Dumber, where he's like, you can't double stamp as triple stamp. You can't.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Street Nasty Entertainment for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, soldier salute.
Triple stamp, a double stamp. Like, that's what we're doing.
Never thought I'd see Dumb and Dumber analogy in foreign policy be so appropriate. So
thank you.
That's pretty good. Right.
Yes, thank you. I'm really good with the pop culture really references. Colonel McGregor, I want to ask about the Defense Secretary's testimony today, because this idea that, no, we did destroy their nuclear facilities, but we are now after ambitions, and they keep expressing ambition. So that is an open-ended game. What do you make of this? That also feels like a line from Dumb and Dumber. It's not, but I probably could write a movie around it.
I think we have to go back and understand that everything is based on Israel's demands, or Mr. Netanyahu's demands, that you have a no more nuclear enrichment of any kind in Iran. Of course, you dismantle half your arsenal of ballistic missiles and unmanned systems, and then you don't cooperate with anybody in the region anymore. These are the same old demands. We're determined that Iran will be compelled to accept those demands and subordinate itself to Israeli dominance in the region and effectively Jewish supremacy in the region. I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't make much difference what we do, but I think that's where we are. So what he's doing is, moving the so-called goalposts. It's not enough to tell people you can't enrich uranium. We can actually read your mind now and tell that you're truly trying to enrich uranium, and if given the opportunity, will build a nuclear weapon. It's just, you can't make this sort of thing up, but the logical inconsistency ought to worry everybody. There's something else, though, that's going on here that nobody pays any attention to. Our entire economy is based on two critical pillars. One is cheap energy. The second is cheap credit. And as energy becomes more and more expensive, credit dries up. In other words, you have to pay more interest for the money you borrow. We already know that we have a liquidity crisis, not just in banks, but in private equity funds. You've got BlackRock and KKR and others right now that are trying to borrow cash against the assets they have under management. Just imagine that. That's because they have no cash to pay out to people that want their money. And they've now simply said, we're not going to pay you any money based upon what you invested with us. This is a very bad sign. And as the energy becomes more expensive, as it goes to $110 a barrel of oil, $120, $130, $140, $150, and keeps going until this crisis ends globally, we're going to go under financially. You're going to have a crisis here that makes 2007 and 2008 look mild. Many economists are predicting not just a serious recession, but certainly in much of the world, depression. And I think all of these things are what President Putin was trying to convey to President Trump, because at some point, everybody says these Americans are maniacs. They've lost their minds. Yeah. They're going to destroy the whole world. And so suddenly you have China, which is obviously very dependent upon the energy, even though they have stockpiled more oil than perhaps anybody else. They're rapidly expanding their nuclear power. They've got enormous quantities of coal and coal-fired plants. They've done a lot of work in renewables. China will survive this. Japan and Korea, they're on the edge. And these people are supposed to be our friends. Yeah. And we've done enormous damage to them. The same thing's true in India. And at some point, Egypt, which is trying to feed 100 million people and is having great difficulty doing so, is going to face famine. Then, of course, you have the Turks at the other end. All of these states are being pushed into a state of war, not just with Israel, but ultimately with us. Because without Israel, we wouldn't be doing any of this. And they all know it. So Russia, China, Egypt, Turkey, India, who knows who else may join such a coalition to force us to stop. I'd prefer that we not go there. And I think President Trump ought to end this stupid blockade. I think he adopted the blockade approach because that was the only thing they could think of short of going back to war. But the blockade isn't going to work because the world's not going to tolerate that. Right. So I think he's increasingly moving in the direction of going back to bombing and missile strikes, which again, I don't think is going to prove effective.
Well, don't you hate when people say, I told you so? Yeah, that's me, actually, because I did tell you, sorry, but I told you that gold and silver were going to reap the benefits of excessive money print.
Colonel Davis, we already see now breaking alliances in the Middle East, and we cannot put those things together. Now the UAE has left OPEC, which has removed a lot of power from Saudi Arabia. Colonel McGregor, last time he was on the show, said that, Arab nations are really going to be pushed to stop their alliances with the United States and Israel, and we cannot repair those relationships. So how do you see this further breaking down if we don't, humble ourselves and stop it?
Yeah, that's one of the least considered, and oddly enough, even in our mainstream media, And everybody likes to focus on, what we're doing to Iran or when they're going to buckle, but there's hardly any focus on our allies because they are paying an enormous price. It's not even just that, they can't get their ships out. I mean, they're not getting things in either. I mean, these are countries that are desperately dependent upon imports also for their population. They're obviously even more critical to their the money they get from the selling of this oil. So they have a lot of issues. President Trump has been focused a lot here the last 36 hours or so on allegations that the block-in of the oil from Iran, because they're running out of storage space, is going to cause their pipelines to explode and crazy stuff like that. But nobody's paying attention to the fact that the exact same dynamics occur for our allies. I think 5 of the 6 GCC countries are either at or very nearly max capacity on their storage, and they don't have anywhere else to put it. So they're going to have to stop pumping oil too. And it's unknown what kind of implications that could have. We've never had a situation like this in our lifetimes, to where as a system here, you've had a forced stoppage of being able to draw oil out of the ground. So it's kind of a theory. We don't know, but it's very likely to be a big problem. And that means that, once you get this open, it's going to be a problem to get it unwound, and they'll have to figure out what's going to happen. I can't help but think, if I'm putting myself in their positions, they know that this was a war completely of choice. And the only reason behind it was none of these nonsense about a nuclear weapons program. That's not. We've already known, always known, that there was no nuclear weapons program. It doesn't matter how much they can reprocess. It matters whether they're going to do anything with it. And everybody in the region knew that it wasn't about nuclear weapons. It was, as Doug just said, it was about Benjamin Netanyahu coercing Trump, or convincing him, whatever word you want to use, to start this war that was not related to our national security at all. Well, they can now see that because of that choice by Trump at the insistence of Netanyahu, they are paying a tremendous price. That's on top of the physical damage that's already been caused in their countries. And God forbid, if we return to a hot war here, and now then they're the targets in their infrastructure, where it's going to cause systemic damage that's going to take into 2027 in a best case scenario, once the war is over, to get that stuff repaired. Now then their entire country is on the brink here, because if they go an extended period without getting to have any revenue to just conduct the affairs of state, to just feed their population and just continue to have economic production, etc., I mean, they're going to get pretty angry, because they know that all of this was because of the choice made by Donald Trump. So I haven't seen a lot of information on that. I think there's a lot of grumbling behind the scenes, but man, if it was me, I'd be pretty upset about it. And once this is over, I'd be looking nearly anywhere else for any kind of future connections, and BRICS is going to start to look more and more appealing.
Right.
Gosh, yeah.
Doug, Doug, I wanted to get your take on what Colonel Davis said there and earlier when he said, we keep talking about the United States would be the ones to end the blockade, but what if Iran says enough is enough, and we start kinetic war from their side, saying we're going to break through, we're done with this, and they start to push through? What would that look like? Do you see that happening?
Well, I don't think they would do it alone. I think if the blockade lasted that long and did that much damage, as I think it will to the rest of the world, I would not be surprised to see the Chinese fleet show up in the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
Oh.
My point is that there are many people who have much to lose here, and we are dismissing their concerns out of hand. We're not even talking about our own people. You go to California right now. California is heavily dependent on imported oil. Most people don't know that. I mean, they've had years and years of this brilliant green leadership, so they don't have very many refineries. They don't have much storage. They don't have much drilling in terms of extracting oil. So how do we get the oil to California? We don't have any pipelines that run over or through the Rockies. Pretty soon, we're going to have to store oil in trucks and then ship it over to California. Things are going to get very bad in California very quickly. Nobody's pointing that out. And by the way, the rest of the world is beginning to do exactly what Dan said. The president of the Republic of Korea, we call it South Korea, has now announced publicly it's time for Korea to defend itself. Well, it was time for Korea to do that a long time ago, but we wouldn't leave. We currently control all of their armed forces, and the Koreans don't like that. They haven't liked that for at least 20 years. Now they want control of their own armed forces. I think we're going to watch the dissolution of our unofficial overseas imperial holdings take place. I think the Koreans are going to toss us out. I think that Japan is right behind them. And now we have efforts in the Pacific to organize these trilateral relationships where the Koreans, the Filipinos, the Japanese are all going to cooperate with us in a future war with China. Not on the planet, not in our lifetimes. Nobody's interested in going to war with China at all. In fact, China is beginning to look like a better place in terms of being a safe house for your cash and your investments in the United States. And this began when we started telling the Russians that we have billions of rubles and you're not going to be allowed to have any of it. We're going to tie it up. We may even give your cash away to the Ukrainians. People have watched this and said, do you really want to depend on the U.S. financial system? Do you want them to tell you how you're going to manage your own bank accounts, or worse, steal your money? I mean, there are so many things going on right now that are bad. The last thing that the American people need is a war, and certainly no war under any circumstances that involves China or Russia or any other powers along with Iran. And yet that seems to be the direction in which we're headed.
I want to ask further about the Secretary of War's testimony to Congress. He was asked about the bombing of the base in Kuwait, and he said, oh, that's just U.S. troops spreading falsehoods about me, where 6 soldiers were killed in a retaliatory strike. Has there ever been a fallout like this between soldiers and the Secretary of War that is supposed to represent them like this? How is that going to play out to the troops? He's throwing them under the bus and he's supposed to represent them. Maybe either of you, how do you think that would be received by members of the military?
Well, I mean, I could just tell you from my own perspective, obviously pretty badly. I mean, you're already putting this out there, and I know this from some direct contacts from some folks that are deployed in this operation. They're already going, why are we even here? What is this for? I mean, at least when Doug and I fought together in Desert Storm, we knew it was because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. We were trying to restore it, and they could move on Saudi Arabia. And we had a UNSC Security Council. We had authorization from the U.S. Congress. We all were very confident about what we were doing. We knew what the mission was. We knew we had the capabilities, and we were pretty enthused, if I can just be honest, at the time about getting it done. But now then these guys are going here and they're like going, why are we here at all? There's no UNSC. There's no anybody else in the world, only the country of Israel that's behind putting this in. Everybody can see that there's no play for America here. Our security wasn't at threat. It wasn't at risk. And then yet now here, at least 13 of us are dead. 400 are wounded that we know of. The numbers could well be higher, according to a lot of information. And when then you hear this dismissive talk by the Secretary of War, don't worry about this. It's like complaining, or they saw how he, dismissed a lot of the senior leaders there a month or two, I guess it was a little while back when he brought them all to the Pentagon and kind of lectured everybody like he was the king and they were the little guys. It just didn't have a good look. So there's not a lot of respect, I don't think, from the bottom to the top, because they don't see a lot of respect from the top to the bottom. He went out there today, and by the way, one thing that really got my goat up is that when he went on there and he was actually using these people, our deployed troops, as bait to throw in the face of some Democratic lawmakers by saying, you dishonor our troops here by calling into question this mission. And I actually did a show just before we came on here, and I said, no one's calling into question their dedication. We're calling into question your judgment to put them in a position where they can't win. And now 400 are wounded and 13 are dead so far. So that's, I think, the bigger question that needs to be answered.
Yeah, Doug, do you want to take that as well? I mean, he's saying that you're accusing the U.S. troops of just like spreading falsehoods, this idea that those service members said publicly that they were moving them to a completely undefended location in Kuwait, and then 6 soldiers were killed as a result of it. He says they're just spreading falsehoods.
It's personal.
Well, the first thing is that President Trump has never made his case to Congress or to the American people about the need for this conflict. He simply acted independently. I think he didn't bother going to Congress because he knew that the Israel lobby and its agents in the United States effectively control Congress. And so he probably decided, I don't need to go over there. And if you go back to his State of the Union speech, when he mentioned that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, well, everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation. But the problem is he never went to the American people. And contrary to popular belief, the American people are not necessarily 100% aligned with the Congress. That's pretty obvious. And then in addition to not having gone to the American people, has any of this ever been adequately explained to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that you expect to fight? We actually received pretty thorough briefings from the entire chain of command, starting with President George Herbert Walker Bush all the way down back in 1990. Everybody knew why we were there. Everybody recognized that we didn't want the oil fields to fall into the hands of Saddam Hussein. There was concern that he might just keep going and move right through Kuwait and straight down the coast on the Arabian Peninsula. So I think everybody understood that. And it was made clear that we were not necessarily going to stay there in perpetuity. And the rest is history. There's been no effort on the part of the president to communicate anything. Now, having said all of that, the Secretary of Defense did not personally order these soldiers to some location where they were unfortunately killed and wounded. That's not the way it works. And I think most people know that. To blame the Secretary of Defense for everything that happens anywhere at any time, particularly in a combat zone, is ridiculous. Secretaries of war, specifically during World War II and Korea and Vietnam, did hold forth and explain why things had happened. But I've never seen the kind of hostility, lack of confidence that you see in the Congress right now directed at a Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense. I mean, that's new to me. I've just not seen that.
Yeah.
Well, when you see that, when you see that this Pentagon is doing the bidding of Netanyahu and what the Israelis want, you also see the silence that's happening now on Lebanon. And in a few minutes here, we're going to be joined by a reporter, Steve Sweeney, from Beirut, of course, who was targeted in an assassination attempt there for covering the war. But by all accounts, there is a genocide unfolding in southern Lebanon right now. Entire neighborhoods, infrastructure, hospitals, schools, civilian infrastructure being totally decimated. And it looks like Gaza 2.0. The world seems, or at least the United States seems silent on it, of course. Colonel Davis, I'll start with you on Lebanon. What do you see happening here, and where will the Gulf states be in support or distancing themselves from Lebanon?
You know, I was actually on Mario Nafal's show. I think it was yesterday, and he started showing some footage from southern Lebanon that I had not seen up until that point. And I mean, I was just shocked. I thought for a minute that it was Gaza, but then I could tell from the terrain that was different. Then I thought, oh my God, that's new. And it looked like a nuclear weapon had gone off. I mean, there was that level of utter destruction. There was hardly any structures that were still left standing. And I'm saying from a military perspective, you can't hide behind this ridiculous statement that the Israelis have been saying for so long that, oh, well, there was Hezbollah fighters in there and they were using as human shields and hiding behind whatever hospitals and anything else. And so we just had to go in and take it out. That's self-evidently untrue. But unfortunately, it just keeps working. And so they just keep doing it. And you can see that it's a methodical destruction of the territory on there. And there's no military need for it whatsoever. It's just we're going to mow the grass of everything that exists and get it out. I don't know what their ultimate purpose is, whether it's just ethnic cleansing or just moving everything back so that there's not even the theoretical possibility of anybody can use in that territory for anything against Israel. I don't know. But, that is a real question. How long will the global population, and not just the regions, the countries in the region, but the whole global population, just sit passively by and watch this methodical destruction? I mean, in the last year, toward the end of the summer and into the early fall, there was a lot of uprising. What was happening in Palestine people in Gaza. And you saw, the Emmanuel Macron and French people, some British folks, et cetera. They were all saying, hey, we're going to recognize the Palestinian state to put pressure on Israel. And so then they backed off a little bit and at least gave some eye dressing to having a so-called ceasefire, which has been anything but it placated people enough. And so that really Israel went to a lower level of war. They didn't really go into a ceasefire. It's kind of the same thing in Lebanon so far that we've seen. But one wonders at some point, are the people going to get back up to annoyed enough to say, you're still doing it in the Gaza, you're still doing versions of it in the West Bank and now here in Lebanon, and you never gave up the territory you took in Syria either. I mean, I wonder if there is a limit. So far, there doesn't seem to be one.
Yeah, this is some of the footage you're referring to, by the way. This is
Israel. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Doug, what do you have to say about that?
I think that this Israeli war for the Greater Israel Project is the catalyst for the collapse of American power around the world, because we have unconditionally supported it. We're on a road to an economic crisis, a financial catastrophe, something that we really haven't experienced since the 1930s. That's how bad it's going to be. Until it gets that bad, people are not going to stand up. They're not going to go into the streets. They're not going to make their views felt and understood in Washington. And right now, both the Senate, the House, and the White House, all of these three institutions are firmly in the grip of the lobby. So when this collapse comes, and I think it's coming sometime this year, it's going to be god-awful hell to pay for the Israelis, and it's going to be the end of this administration, and probably the end for most of the people on the Hill. I think that's how serious it's going to get. It's hard for people to imagine, because what we're really seeing happen right now is a movement from abundance, which we've had now for decades, an abundance of oil, an abundance of cash, an abundance of everything, to scarcity. We're suddenly not going to enjoy the living standard that we've enjoyed for so long. We're going to look a lot like Great Britain after World War II, hopelessly debt-ridden and busy extracting our forces from everywhere in the world to try and cut expenses and get back on our feet. And we all know, historically, Great Britain never got back on its feet. It was finished after World War II. I hope it's not going to be that bad, but the way I see it right now, if things happen as I anticipate, we're going to have a larger war. Let's assume you just stick with the blockade initially. How long before others show up to force your blockade to end? Are we going to try and extend this blockade to becoming a global event? That's already been uttered by the Secretary of War. He said we're going to have a global blockade. You've got General Kane, who's talked about boarding ships and blockading ships that are coming out of the Persian Gulf and headed somewhere inside the Strait of Malacca. I mean, talk about stupidity on stilts, taking something that should already be over, it should have ended, and now turning it into a global phenomenon that's going to lead to a global war of some kind. And I just don't see anything good happening for us. And I don't see the American people profiting in any way. And I don't blame the American people for their complacency. Americans are human beings. If they're not hurt immediately, if they don't feel immediate pain, their tendency is, well, let's see how this turns out. This is not going to turn out well. It's going to turn out very badly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think so many people are going about their lives. They're not intentionally burying their heads in the sand, but until they notice it on the grocery store shelves or they see it at the gas tank in a much larger capacity, the inflation going up and housing prices coming down and mortgage rates going back up and all of these things that are tied to this lack of food on the table, et cetera, that's when there's going to be an awakening. And I hope that people wake up ahead of that, but I don't anticipate. Just a few minutes ago, Natalie just shared this with me. This is disgusting, but this is Benjamin Netanyahu just posting this on social media about Lebanon just a few minutes ago. Says Lebanon continuing, and just sharing bombs just hitting infrastructure all throughout Lebanon. So this is the president of Israel, prime minister of Israel, just sharing
their war crimes. Might as well put it out there so we don't catch him.
Colonel Davis, Colonel McGregor, great to see both of you. Thank you so much for your analysis as always. And we hope that cooler heads prevail, but God knows that doesn't seem to be the case. Thank you both, gentlemen. Great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Give me 1 minute, y'all. Hold on, it won't show the screen. might have to start it over just to see if it won't screen share.
Nine 2026, and our dear friend, our brother Pepe Escobar is here with us. Welcome back, Pep.
Nima and all of you, our audience. Well, I am in paradise, but we work hard. You all know Nima works hard. I work hard. All of us. So I transferred the headquarters of war on Iran to one of the Thai islands. I prefer not to say where I am, but it's absolutely spectacular. Here I am at the villa, the little pool in the back, windows are open, so I am in the middle of nature, top of a hill, jungle around me, outstanding birds, and 15-minute walk from here, it's the Andaman Sea. There you go. So this is an observation point. Wow, that's quite something to examine our progressive dementia now, Nima, which is getting more and more demented by the minute. But at least I am in a place now where you can have a little bit of, you can relax, step back, and start looking at the bigger picture. And not in a big city where you are. It's too much noise. It's too much hassle. Here is, wow. And to give you an idea, Nima, I was watching Arakshi in St. Petersburg. So it was.
Let's get started. Let's get started with that particular meeting. The last step of the tour that Arakshi had, the foreign minister of Iran had in St. Petersburg.
Yes.
Pepe, what was that, and what was the importance of this meeting? Because Iranian wanted to update Russian part, they wanted to talk. And what is your understanding? Before Iran going to Moscow, Arakchi went to Islamabad, then Muscat, and later on the last visit was to St. Petersburg. What do we know about that?
Well, it was immensely, meticulously well planned, Nima. And this was, let's say, a mini tour of 3 cities in different stages. So Arakshi first went to Islamabad to talk to the Pakistani mediators. So what was he doing? He was basically re-stressing the 10 points, which apparently were read by the President of the United States, and obviously he didn't understand what he was reading. He even posted saying that he more or less agreed to it. We don't know what he read. If it was lost in translation, if it was a summary, if it was somebody, yapping at his ear or whatever. Anyway, so Arakshi had to tell the Pakistani mediators, look, the 10 pointers are still our position, but now we are refining it. Assuming that the Americans, there's no negotiation, especially coming from Dumb and Dumber, Tweedledum and Tweedledee with Kushner. And from the Iranian point of view, the only possible negotiator from now on is Vance. Well, so after Islamabad, Arakshi went to Oman, where he was personally received by the emir. Very, very important. There were no leaks about what they discussed, but we can basically have a very good idea that it also involved the next setup for the Strait of Hormuz, which Iranians and Omanis are already trying to organize. So maybe we could have let's say, a toll booth on the Iranian side and another toll booth on the Omani side. After all, These are not international waters. Once again, we have to repeat it. This is 21 nautical miles, the distance from the Iranian shore to the Omani shore. If you have 12 nautical miles on each country, that's 24, basic math. So their territorial waters are larger than the strait itself. So it's their territorial waters. So Iran has the perfect right to install a toll booth on Hormuz. And now they are discussing with the Omanis what's going to be on Omani territorial waters. After that, he went back to Islamabad. He didn't go straight to Moscow. He went back to Islamabad because he was refining the three key conditions by Iran if we're going to have any meaningful negotiations from now on. And that's when things start to get really, really interesting, because they turn the chessboard upside down, essentially. Number one, the war has to end for good, with written assurances, with written guarantees, with big powers guaranteeing it. And if it goes to that useless UN Security Council, approved by the UN Security Council. Number two, we're going to discuss what's going to happen to the Strait of Hormuz. Then Iran will have a new setup installed in the Strait of Hormuz, very similar to the one already now. It has already been essentially approved by the Iranian parliament. There will be a toll booth and paid in Iranian rials. So the Iranian currency can start, at least stop being devalued. And number three, which is the third and last stage, let's start discussing about the nuclear, a new nuclear deal, which, if it happens, I would say the best possible case is a sort of diluted JCPOA, which, by the way, was killed by Trump himself. So he's not going to get a better JCPOA, a better from an American point of view than the original JCPOA discussed, clinched in 2015 in Vienna, and then approved by the United Nations. So this is the order of discussions. Now, obviously, the Americans, when they looked at it, they freaked out completely. Trump already rejected it. So the problem is he already rejected, but as we know, everybody knows, as I would say camels in the middle of the Gobi Desert already know, anything he does, there's no way out for him. So he can he can admit the strategic defeat, which he'll never do. He can restart the war, which is going to be a major disaster, and even his own generals told him it's going to be a major disaster. Or he can try to find a composite. But with the illegal, murderous blockade on. And the Iranians said, no way. We only start discussing if the blockade is out. And Trump is basically saying, first, we have to discuss about the nuclear deal, and then the rest. So, Nima, we are in the middle of a horrible strategic impasse. And we don't know the way out of all that for the moment. It looks pretty bleak. But after all that, the last stage of the trip, which was the icing on the cake, Arakshi gets to St. Petersburg in a Mirage Airlines flight, a normal commercial flight. And the title of this, inscribed in the fuselage of the plane, this flight was the Minab 168 flight, a direct homage to the girls killed by the two-tap tomahawk assault on the Minab school. He was received not only by his counterpart, Grandmaster Sergei Lavrov, but by President Putin in person. 1 hour and a half of discussions. Many of us will not remember Putin receiving not a head of state, and even with head of states, that's very rare. They usually talk for half an hour, exploding 40 minutes. He was talking to a foreign minister and his team for 1 hour and a half. So obviously the leaks that we have are very vague. But this is what I got three key points that I stressed in my column. Some of the things that Putin said, they were absolutely outstanding. Let me see if I find the key points here, Nima. Yes, here they are. Because I want to re-stress for you and for our audience how sophisticated and at the same time sharp as a dagger was Putin addressing Arakshi. Point number one, total respect for the supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. Putin said, last week I received a message from the supreme leader of Iran. And then he said, please, to Arakshi, please convey my most sincere words of gratitude, confirm that Russia, just like Iran, intends to continue our strategic partnership. Please convey to the Supreme Leader words of gratitude for this message and wishes of the best health and well-being. So it's the total opposite of how Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei is treated by the Americans. By Russia is total respect. Point number two, Iran is fighting everything. The whole fight of Iran is about two key items, independence and sovereignty. These are words of Putin himself. We see how courageously and heroically the people of Iran are fighting for their independence and sovereignty. Amazing. And point number three, which is the absolute killer, and obviously the Americans are completely freaking out about it because now it comes from Putin's own words. We will do everything that serves our interests of all peoples in the region. So this means he was addressing Arakshi, but he was also addressing everybody else in the Persian Gulf to ensure that this peace is achieved as soon as possible, meaning Russia is now directly involved in a diplomatic solution for the war. And the last thing he said, Nima, which was a killer, this is Putin telling Arakshi, you know our position well. Wow. So when you put this all together, what do we see? First of all, that Iran turned the chessboard upside down, and now it's showing to the Americans, if you don't follow these three conditions, this war is not going to end. And they know that Trump needs an off-ramp, and he needs this war to end. This war is immensely unpopular in the United States. And Trump's numbers are absolutely appalling, and they will continue to go down. And number two, Iran and Russia announced to the whole planet that they are in this together to find a solution. So Russia has got Iran's back. And this comes directly from Putin. Now try to explain this to the Epstein Syndicate. Now they're going to have to deal not only with Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, but with Vladimir Putin as well, if they want a solution for the war that they started illegally and murderously against Iran. So that's why, Nima, this trip was something, this was a game-changing trip, really, really. No hyperbolic, no. This was the real thing. It was very well planned, very well organized. Arakshi was absolutely impeccable. And in the end, of course, they had to finish in Russia with, I would say, showing not only to the Eurasia environment, to the global South as a whole, that this is very, very clear, that not only Tehran, but Moscow and also Beijing, which was just observing from a distance, this is a war against Eurasian integration, against BRICS, against the SCO, against the global South, and obviously Russia has to be on the side of Iran. Obviously, Nima, none of that will be accepted in Washington or in Mar-a-Lago. So we still don't know how the American response is going to be. As it stands, decided to prolong the naval blockade indefinitely. This means he's not capitulating, which is something that he could do. He could just proclaim victory and walk away. And then that's in terms of a strategic, the strategic defeat of the Americans would be very clear for the whole planet, or he can restart the war, which is going to be an absolute disaster. So he decided to prolong the blockade, and we know that the rest of the world sooner or later is going to explode against the blockade. This blockade cannot last for weeks, not to mention months. Let's say it could last for another 2-3 weeks maximum. After that, when people start seeing the absolutely horrendous effects across the global economy, there's going to be a movement, and a concerted movement, especially from the global South, to turn this thing around. And Iran, they have time on their side once again. Okay, Nima, this is more or less the the summary of these very fateful days between Islamabad, Muscat, and St. Petersburg.
I think considering the behavior of the United States as a country for such a long time in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen that they continue sort of their agenda in those countries as long as it takes, and then someday they decide that there is nothing there anymore and let's leave it. Mm-hmm. And the problem here, by the way, with the war against Iran is the global economy is under tremendous pressure, as with the case of the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody knew the importance of even here in the mainstream media, in the alternative media, we didn't know the scale of dependence on the Strait of Hormuz before this war started, and how this could influence the global economy and put pressure on many countries. Look at Japan today. What is happening in Japan? That's why look at South Korea. Look at what is happening right now in Europe. They're desperate. The situation is getting worse as time goes by. And this is not Iraq. That's why I think this is not Iraq and Afghanistan to stay there for 10 years, 20 years, and let's see what would happen. This is something different. And the United States is not going to be able to stay there in that region. This blockade is getting, they're not getting anything positive from this blockade, in my opinion. The United States is not getting anything positive. And on the other hand, they're convincing Iranians that the United States is not serious in the way that they're talking about negotiations or anything of that sort. That's why Iranians really feel that this next round of war is going to happen anytime soon. And your understanding of that, Pepe?
Oof. It's a very, very, very long story, because even allies of the US are negotiating with the Iranians to have a passage through Hormuz. Paying, of course, for Japan and South Korea, no problem. As long as their tankers can go through, no problem. Other Iranian tankers, for instance, they found a way already to dribble the American blockade. It's to navigate very close to territorial waters in Iran, in Pakistan, and all the way to Mumbai. It can be done. If you stay within the 12 nautical miles, you can go. The Americans are not, theoretically, are not going to attack you. Lots of tankers are passing through one way or another. So it's not an ironclad blockade. Once in a while, we have a Hollywoodish Netflix production where the Americans say, we boarded, the Marines boarded so and so and so, and then he had to go back. And then we made a mistake because he thought it was going to Iran and it's not. Blah, blah, blah. So it's inefficient. obviously, they cannot patrol the whole Arabian Sea and the southern Indian Ocean. Absolutely out of a cut. So they are in, I would say, more or less. And by the way, nobody went to actually check how many warships are in the Arabian Sea, in the southern Indian Ocean, and what they are actually doing. So we rely on CENTCOM and INDOPACOM, blah, blah, blah. And these people lie all the time. So we don't know for sure what's really happening. Anyway, is this going to work? No. Is this going to actually change Iran's mind in terms of the control that they exercise on the Strait of Hormuz? No. Is Iran dribbling the blockade? Of course, they are dribbling over land. Iran is a crossroads, not only maritime, but over land, historically, zillions of years. So, for instance, what do we have? Pakistan, they opened 6 overland corridors to Iran. So Iran, they can move now even oil. Of course, the quantities are not the same as if you're moving oil by tankers, but a certain amount of oil is already being moved by railway on the China-Iran railway, which arrives at 20 kilometers outside of Tehran with no problem. They need to step up their game. Of course, they need to dribble the technical problems of exporting larger amounts of oil by rail to China. They will find it. The Iranians are always, they're masters at improvisation. On top of it, there's gas, for instance. Gas, you can go through the Turkmenistan to Xinjiang gas pipeline. They can do swaps with Turkmenistan and export some extra gas via this pipeline going straight to Western China. So there are other options. These are products that need to arrive from China to Iran. Now it's not a problem anymore because of these 6 overland corridors unblocked by Pakistan. For instance, there were, I think, at least 3,000 containers that were stranded in Karachi. They could not move. Now they're moving overland to Iran with essentially Chinese products. So Iran is not going to be starved out of Chinese products, merchandise, goods, etc. So there are many ways to dribble the Americans, of course. It's not about, and the Caspian. The Caspian it's more complicated. For instance, for Iran to sell oil via the Caspian, the problem is the infrastructure of the Iranian ports in the Caspian. You know that, Dima. It's not very good. And it's nothing that they cannot do this in a matter of a few weeks. And it requires a lot of investment as well. But they can also use the Caspian to, from the Caspian, for instance, to Kazakhstan, to Aktau in Kazakhstan in the Caspian, and from Aktau to China. Also possible. Smaller volumes, but also possible. There is one key question which I would like to ask you about, Nima. There's an enormous blah, 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 basically on hearsay and numbers that cannot be fully checked, that Iran has only a few days when they reach maximum storage capacity, especially in Karg, in fact, everywhere. And then they're going to have to be shut-ins in the oil fields. What is your analysis about that, Nima? Because everything that we hear is from Epstein syndicate sources, but not from Iran, not from official sources from the National Iranian Oil Company, for instance. They're not talking about that yet. So please tell us, is Iran going to be in dire straits in a matter of what, a few days, because they don't have any more oil storage capacity?
No, nothing.
I love your answer. No.
Yeah, no, that's not the case, because they had this experience long before these sort of problems happen in Iran because of the sanctions. There were years that Iran couldn't send any oil, to export any oil to other countries, and they knew how to manage the situation, with the walls, with the with the oil, with gas, everything. They have managed that. They have experience because it happened before, because of the sanctions, not because of the blockade. That's why they know the engineers in Iran who are working in this field. They know what is the alternative and how they can manage the situation with these sort of difficulties, sudden difficulties. I would say this is because the blockade is some sort of surprise for Iran, but it's not that much of surprise that is not manageable for Iranians. They know how to deal with it, I think, and so right now it's not even one of the biggest issues in Iran. Nobody's talking about it. You look at
It's like
that's why it's a hoax.
There's not
You're making something, Pepe.
Oil company, nothing. So this means it's not a real problem.
They're making these sort of rhetorics, Pepe. It's not just about this, because they're making that there is some sort of fracture in Iranian leadership. They're fighting each other in Iran. Donald Trump says they called me. They said that we are collapsing here. They're making these things up because they want to influence. Basically, their audience is in the West, is not in the East, is not in Iran. Because the Iranians know what is happening. They know the reality on the battleground. They know the reality with the case of energy, the shortage that they have, the economy, how it works these days. They totally understand the reality of what's going on. But I think what is basically what we are talking about is about what is happening in the West, in the mainstream media, in the way that the Trump administration tries to picture the situation for the Western audience, in my opinion. I don't see any sort of, difficulty, any sort of, somehow crushing difficulties for Iran. These are difficulties for Iranian economy, for Iranian energy. Nobody can ignore that. But they know how to deal with that. This is the basic problem. That's why they're not talking about it. In the mainstream media, in the alternative media in Iran, because many people think that Iran is just one-sided media. No, it's not that. You can find the worst critics of the Iranian government are in Iran, are living in Iran. They're not outside of Iran. Many people don't understand it. And that's why nobody's talking about this in Iran. That's not the major issue right now. The major issue right now for Iranian is how nobody can talk, because they're talking about this fracture in the leadership, the left and right. I don't know what is happening in the mind of Donald Trump. But these people, the basics, or they have different tactics for the negotiation, for how to deal with the United States. But the strategy remains the same. They know that nobody would let the United States to control the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody would dictate anything to Iranians anymore. And if, because of the sanctions, they were able to force Iran for such a long time, to force Iran to some positions, it wasn't a serious position, force Iran something to accept something, but they were trying to put a lot of pressure on Iranian economy to force them into something, or that's not happening anymore. Everybody's saying that's enough. That's not going to happen anymore. This is the outcome what Donald Trump achieved so far in Iran.
And this is reflected by the way they turn the game around, where the most important, the key imperative now is not and it never was, the nuclear dossier. It's to end the war for good, so there will be not a repeat of the war, with guarantees, with guarantors at the level of big powers like Russia and China. Then discuss Hormuz, and at the end of the whole thing, discuss JCPOA 2.0, let's put it this way. And Iran can do that because they're for all practical purposes, they're winning this war. Everybody knows that. It's the Americans that wanted this stupid ceasefire. The Americans who are trying to find an off-ramp, which they can't. And the strategic defeat is obvious because 0 of their initial objectives were achieved. There you go. So no wonder Iran is feeling confident. Huh?
And nobody wants anything similar or close to JCPOA anymore.
Exactly.
That's the point for the Trump administration.
Exactly. Go ahead, Nima.
Because they didn't see JCPOA working for Iran. You remember with the case of JCPOA. Basically, Americans together with Europeans agreed on relieving sanctions or lifting sanctions, but then Donald Trump was elected and everything just didn't happen. They didn't do anything.
And the sanctions continued, and there were more sanctions, more maximum pressure. Exactly.
Yeah. Pepe, the other issue is what UAE is talking about right now, leaving OPEC Plus. What is that and how effective that could be, and how is that going to help Donald Trump in a long run?
Look, I can start with you with, it's not exactly a joke, but in fact, this joke is already circulating in the Persian Gulf. Look, they better get their act together because sooner or later, Iran is going to annex it. Okay, it's a joke. Saudi Arabia could annex it. Basically, they are desperate because they made their bets a long time ago. They bet on the US and Israel. So this means they need to sell more oil, so oil prices go down. What does that mean? They cannot be regulated by OPEC quotas. So if they're out of OPEC, they can export instead of 2.3, 2.5, little more than that, 1 million barrels a day. They can export maybe 5 million barrels a day, which they can. It's possible. So that's it. They want to make more money exporting more oil, and oil prices going down is exactly what the Trump administration wants. There is, of course, the mega friction between MBZ and MBS, between Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, and this is getting more and more uncontained, considering that Saudi Arabia is theoretically at least part of trying to find a diplomatic solution to end the war. They were part of that initial the 4 Sunnis meeting in Islamabad. It was Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. So in thesis, Saudi Arabia wants an accommodation, at least, with Iran. The UAE, on the other hand, and not the UAE, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, that's a completely different story, not the other Emirates, which brings us to the still unconfirmed but extremely juicy possibility of the Republic of Sharjah coming online soon. Of course, because Sharjah has nothing to do with the MBZ is doing. So this is Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Dubai, in terms of the business model, is already dead. Everybody knows that. Nobody's coming back to Dubai. So that leaves Abu Dhabi. The oil is controlled by Abu Dhabi, not Dubai. Dubai is a laundering machine, essentially, which now completely collapsed. So they think that they can preserve their so-called independence and sell more oil, and of course, continue to have their contracts and promises with both Israel and the US on the table, working. We don't know if this is going to happen. They also betting that IMEC, the once again, mega misnomer, India, Middle East corridor, which is the Israel, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Europe, India corridor. We don't know if Saudi Arabia is going to be part of IMEC. Probably not. Not side by side with the Emirates. The Emirates are still betting on IMEC because, of course, they are linked to the Zionist International. So this is their bet. We don't know what's going to happen. But the Russians already said that we are not leaving OPEC Plus. Saudi Arabia, we continue with OPEC. So nothing changes in terms of OPEC or OPEC plus. OPEC plus, basically, Saudi Arabia and Russia control OPEC plus. OPEC, UAE was an important member of OPEC, but it's not going to dismantle OPEC because they're out. And of course, very, very important, Nima, they do that because they are still betting on the petrodollar because of the Epstein syndicate connections. So they assume that they're going to be protected by the US. All bets are off because if Iran, I would say more sooner than later, decide that the Emirates, not the Emirates, Abu Dhabi needs to be taught a lesson because of what they did against Iran since the start of the war, and even before the start of the war, they're going to be in deep trouble. But it's a move conditioned as much by greed as desperation. It's a mix of both.
Pepe, we had the other meeting that Pakistan together with Russia and Iran military commanders or military envoys in Kyrgyzstan. What was that and what was the necessity of that?
This is immense, Nima. This happened in parallel to Arakshi in St. Petersburg. So we had all the ministers of defense of the SCO meeting in Kyrgyzstan. What does that mean for all of you, our audience? That everybody that is everybody in Eurasia, apart from Turkey, was there on the table. On the table, apart from Russia, China, Belarus, India, Pakistan, and all the Central Asians. India and Pakistan were on the same table. Russia and China were on the same table. Everybody was on the same table. And guess what? They were discussing what's going on in Iran because they know that it's a war against them. The American war, once again, is against the BRICS and the SCO at the same time. It's against Eurasia integration. It's against the Eurasia connectivity corridors. And that means the International North-South Transportation Corridor, Russia, Iran, India, 3 BRICS, and all the corridors of the New Silk Roads, Belt and Road Initiative from China. The American war is against all of the above. What do they want? Once again, imperial mindset, divide and rule in Eurasia, pit everybody in Eurasia against each other, and mostly attack the 3 most important members. What I call the new Primakov triangle. It's not with India like it was when Primakov conceptualized it in the late 1990s, at the end of the millennium. It's Iran, Russia, and China. This RIC is the new Primakov triangle, and it's not an accident that they are the 3 top targets of the Trump administration and the American system as a whole. So the fact that you are having the ministers of defense of all the SCO full members sitting on the same table in Kyrgyzstan and listening to the Iranian Minister of Defense saying, among other things, look, guys, we are ready to share our experience in defeating the Americans with all of you on this table. Now, that's once again, this is also a game changer because it's part of how the SCO from now on has to organize themselves, because the next stage of the war coming from the Americans, we're already deep into it. This blockade is, I would say, the starter of a future global blockade by the Americans, assuming they can implement it. This is a test drive, Nima. That's why it's so dangerous. The first test was Venezuela, but it was very easy. They were basically killing fishermen in small boats, but it was a blockade. Next step, They wanted to blockade the Strait of Hormuz from Iran so the Americans would control the Strait of Hormuz. Total disaster. So what's their plan B? Okay, we blockade all Iranian ports, including the choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Is this working? It's too early to tell. For the moment, it's mostly a disaster, but they are already implementing it. It's also a test drive. I would say this is more an Indo-PACOM op than a CENTCOM op, or it's a mix of both, in fact. They had already apprehended Iranian ships outside of the Arabian Sea in the eastern fringe of the Indian
Pacific.
near Sri Lanka already, and not far from Southeast Asia. In fact, already in Southeast Asia. And that brings us to the theme of the column that I wrote today, which is probably going to be published tomorrow, Nima. I sent you the original. First Hormuz and next Malacca. Why? Because this is an American obsession as much as it is a Chinese obsession. It's a Chinese defensive obsession because they knew since the early 2000s, in fact, that this is a story that I have been following for almost 25 years in detail. The famous escape from Malacca syndrome. The Chinese looked at the map, they looked at the Strait of Malacca, and they thought, wow, we are in trouble. All our energy from the Persian Gulf goes through here before reaching the South China Sea and before reaching China. We need to do something about it. So they started Chinese style an offensive in several levels at the same time. So cultivating good relationship with both Malaysia and Indonesia, very successful. Building alternative routes. That famous gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to Xinjiang was built and paid by the Chinese. Gas pipeline from Myanmar. Power of Siberia 1, which is in full capacity, and soon Power of Siberia 2. All that. Plus investing in every single form of green and sustainable energy on the planet. And they excel in all of that. It's, for instance, when I was traveling Xinjiang last year, and you see the electrification of Xinjiang, you see those forests of wind turbines, solar panels, solar farms, etc. And the fact that Xinjiang has so much energy that they sell energy to the rest of China combined, So that's it. So this was the Chinese strategy to escape from Malacca, because they knew that sooner or later, the Americans will try to do something funny in the Strait of Malacca. And we are approaching that juncture, Nima. Sooner or later, they will try something. The first step was that very dodgy military defense agreement that the Minister of Defense of Indonesia signed with the very drunk, very tattooed Secretary of War in Washington. That's tricky. For instance, there was a clash between the Minister of Defense in Jakarta and the Minister of Foreign Relations. They said, what the hell are you doing? We're going to be in the middle of a war between the US and China. And we don't need that. It's the last thing we need at the moment. And the Americans, of course, they are bragging that they're going to have blanket overflight rights over Indonesia territory bordering the Strait of Malacca. If that happens, guess what the Chinese response is going to be? I would not want to be in Jakarta when that happens, if that happens. So we are getting slowly but surely this transfer from Hormuz to Malacca, and part of what is essentially a global American blockade of everyone that escapes selling energy in petrodollars, and everyone that is Putin's definition of Iran, independent and sovereign. So that's why what we're seeing now is a test drive, and things can be much more hardcore from now on.
I think 80% of their energy Chinese is receiving from the Strait of Malacca. 80%.
Yes, true. 80% of, yes, because everything that comes from the Persian Gulf has to go through the Strait of Malacca. There's no other way. It could go through the Straits of Sunda, the Strait of Lombok, but the easiest way is the Strait of Malacca. So the Indonesians, they have to be very careful on how they manage this thing, because they now are under pressure from the Americans, and the Chinese are looking at it in with meticulously.
Yeah, it's not just about, we have Japan receiving from using that strait. You have South Korea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So considering that a key plank of the American strategy is we need to control all sources of oil, and all sources of oil have to be, everything has to be settled in petrodollars. So this means they have to, we are already in the first stages. They have to install a global blockade. There's no other way. And this is their strategy, which is now very, very clear, not only for China, but for all those people who are sitting at that table in Kyrgyzstan, the SCO nations. And but everybody's going to find ways to dribble that. For instance, it's not by accident that early this week, Pakistan liberated these 6 overland corridors with Iran. Why? Because the transit country between Iran and China, apart from Central Asia, which is the longest way, the easiest way between Iran and China is via Pakistan. And Pakistan has excellent relations with China. They are part of the New Silk Roads. China is building the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And they have very good relations with Iran that that's why Iran trusted them to be the mediators, trying to find a way out of the war. So, this is going to move a lot. And of course, all the railway maze from Xinjiang across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, going to Iran. This is going now this is on overdrive. And now, especially now that the China-Iran railway is finished. It was finished, I think in August last year, less than a year ago. Now you can do everything by train. That's it. And the Chinese are betting on this. It's part of the East-West corridor, the Chinese East-West corridor. And the most important part of this corridor is across Iran. Because across Central Asia was easy. They start building these railways a long time ago.
I think one of the crucial points for SCO is how to secure, how to protect these routes for the future of the East. Eurasia, the whole concept of Eurasia. And I don't see India being in that, Pepe. India is so tricky. I see Russia, China, and Iran being together in that concept, because we accept it or not, this blockade is just bringing some new points in the mind of Chinese government, for example.
Yes.
So what would happen? What would, how would we react to if the United States tries to do the same thing to us, to Chinese government, or to Russia, for example? Because we know they started with Russia. You remember the attacks on the Russian tankers, and it's not just the United States. They were talking about NATO is trying to do something with Russia.
Yes.
Then now with Iran, I think we can assure that they're going to continue with this sort of attitude, because in the Western Hemisphere, I'm talking about the United States and North America, South America, here in Brazil, we know what's going on, what's the game on the part of Washington. They're not that much dependent on the oil coming from outside.
Yeah.
That's why they can totally break down this whole system in the East to bring this as they call it, empire. I think what Ambassador Chas Freeman brings out about how the world is reshaping itself as the multinodal, because you look at the relationship, nature of the relationship between China as a giant. You look at China economically, militarily, is a giant country. How the nature of it, they're not putting pressure on Russia or Iran because they understand the relationship, partnership. But that's not the case for the United States.
Nima. They are all of them have a strategic partnership. So at the highest level, they are aligned. Which this trip to by Arakshi to St. Petersburg was a reaffirmation of the strategic partnership. But India is very, very tricky because they made their bet even before the attack on Iran. They made their bet on Israel and the US because, of course, of the Indian business interests behind the Modi government. They will regret it sooner or later. And obviously, the other SCO members, they look at India and they said, should these guys be here at this table with us? And from an Iranian point of view, it's going to be very hard for India to mend its ties. I would say that this could even involve India out of the Chabahar project, replaced by China. The Iranians will not trust India anymore, especially investing in one of their key ports. So, and it's all India's doing. They did that to themselves. So, and of course, once again, BRICS is in coma to a large extent because of what India has been doing. It's not because of China, Russia. No, it's because of India. And they didn't say a word about one fellow BRICS member being attacked by the US. Nothing. So this will have consequences, serious consequences.
Yeah. Pepe, the other issue we know that is in Lebanon. Do you see Iran talking with the United States? How does Iran want to bring in the case of Lebanon? Because the case of Lebanon is so serious. We know that the United States...
But the problem is, how can you deal with the fifth columnist traitor government in Beirut? What are these people doing? They should be out. They should be thrown out. If these people continue in power, nothing's going to happen. And of course, the death cult will continue to bomb whole villages and small towns in southern Beirut and exterminate them from the map, literally, without one peep from the international community. Same with Gaza. It's Gaza 2.0, now applied to southern Beirut, southern Lebanon as a whole. Yes. It's absolutely disgusting, and it's not going to change. And the only ones who are resisting are Hezbollah, for obvious reasons. We all know that. Hezbollah will always resist. And now, with their new leadership and the cadres that, second rank or third rank, as competent as the previous one who were assassinated, they can resist this a very, very long term. But obviously, it's very hard to resist when whole areas are being literally bombed from the only war that the death cult knows how to conduct, apart obviously from killing women and children, is to bomb from above and raise populations literally from the map. It's absolutely disgusting. And we should not expect anything coming from the United Nations. No question about that. We should not expect anything coming from the collective West. So the only ones who are actually defending Lebanon are, once again, Iran.
I think that's why we're not going to have, basically, when I think about an agreement between Iran and the United States, that's impossible.
It's impossible.
Because the first point for Iran is to permanently end the war, which is Iran and Lebanon and the acts of resistance, the whole acts of resistance.
The whole acts, exactly.
Goes to, I would say, goes to Gaza as well. They're not going to.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's going to be all together. That's why Donald Trump doesn't have that sort of power, or he didn't practice it so far. That's why I don't think that he's going to be able to do anything to put, to somehow convince the government in Israel to do something differently. They're literally destroying
it's controlled by them, Nima. How can he even try to do something? He's totally controlled by them. And now with signs of progressive dementia, compounded with that narcissism, intergalactic narcissism, it's even worse. And of course, lies, nonstop. Lies and bragging. And then bragging, lies. That's it. That's the only narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pepe, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
My pleasure.
As always.
I hope the good vibes here, al fresco, in front of the Andaman Sea between the
good Lord, now 60 years ago, when I was like 11, we would do a maypole, to dance around the maypole. There was an old British
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore at schools.
Yeah, we used to do that at Gaffney Central Elementary School where I went.
Yeah.
We put colored paper around the pole and carry it out like a maypole, run around with it.
Yeah. Let me start here with the latest news, what was said on Fox News, and later on we've learned from the White House officials. And what was reported, that is the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, has briefed Donald Trump in the Situation Room about the potential final blow to Iran. And the other point that is White House is the White House official stated that the administration is conducting negotiations with Congress regarding the possibility of obtaining permissions for a full war with Iran. I don't know what has happened so far in the 40 days of war. Wasn't that full war? And what does that mean? Where are we right now? Let me start with Larry, with you. What is your understanding of that?
Well, today is the 60th day since the start of the conflict. So they're supposed to, under the War Powers Act, Congress, Trump's going to have to do something. Now, I saw that the White House put out a statement yesterday that Trump basically is considering, the war's over. We fought, the 60 days. We don't have to do anything else. And then they're going to wait a day or two, and they'll start the war again. It's like resetting a clock. So what I've heard from my sources is that Cooper, the admiral, and his underlings, they're recommending let's not go any further. We've done everything that we can do. If we do anything additionally, it's going to be too risky. We're going to use up too many weapons that are already scarce, and we're not going to accomplish anything. Remains to be seen if Kane endorsed their position, but they're briefing the possibility of continued air operations like the first 5 weeks, possible special operations mission to go grab some nuclear material. And what's worrisome about that is there has been a significant increase in the special operations forces moving into the region, both not only SEAL Team 6 but other SEAL units. So they're not traditionally considered part of the soft mission. And then you got Delta there. So it's like loading a gun. Well, if you load it, you're probably going to shoot it. So there's that possibility that they might engage with some form of a ground operation, but they don't have a ground forces commander. And that, as Colonel Wilkerson knows, last thing you want is an Air Force general or a Navy admiral running ground operations. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. So Trump, unfortunately, looks like he's going to go back to war. He's not going to take the exit ramp. And so, I don't know if it'll happen this week or first of next week, but I think it'll be in the next 3 or 4 days. Sure hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Carl, your take.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Larry. I hope we're both wrong. Just for the benefit of your listeners who might think this is a little bit arcane, let me try to simplify it for them with regard to the War Powers Resolution. First of all, the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional. Anybody in the business of interpreting the Constitution, originalist or modernist, will come to that conclusion if they're worth a damn. It was an attempt by the Congress to get the best of both worlds. That is to say, to have something to say about the constitutional propriety, rightness, if you will, rectitude of a conflict, but at the same time retain their wonderful capacity to not support it unless it was successful. In other words, the Congress wanted to look at it for a while, 60 days maybe, and say, oh, it's a failure. Now let's criticize the president from both sides of the aisle. Or now it's a success. Let's say we authorized it and let's go ahead. So the War Powers Resolution is a dilution of the Constitution. Nixon didn't understand that. His lawyers didn't understand that. So he vetoed it. I mean, it was crazy. It was no abridgment on presidential power. It is indeed, as H.W. Bush said one time, it's an enhancement of presidential power. So, and these reporting periods are poppycock because the president can lie through his teeth, or as Larry just said, Trump was also advocating yesterday that ceasefire, stop the war. So 60 days hadn't passed. I mean, these are the kind of concoctions, and I've been there when presidents and their teams like Colin Powell and Dick Cheney and others came up with these excuses with regard to this sort of thing. All that said, we are at a position now where with Hegseth's testimony, with testimony of others that was indirect, like Scott Bessent, and with the president's statements that the Congress ought to stand up and take some action. If for no other reason, the chairman, I think it was, of the House Armed Services Committee, of the subcommittee that looks directly at defense appropriations, he was apoplectic about the money we're spending. And he actually said we're spending more right now on security, he said the Defense Department, but you look at the security budget, it's twice that, than we did at any given day in World War II. And this is absurd, he said. So this is all going to come to a head, I think, around the time of the midterms. And it's going to come to a nasty head because we really are sucking hind, whatever, with regard to our debt. And this is just deepening it and deepening it and deepening it. And at the same time, you probably saw that the meeting they're going to have in Colombia, 60 countries, I think, coming, didn't even invite us. So this is the future for the United States of America, whether it's a climate crisis like this is involved with, or whether it's any other issue. They do not want us there, and they will not want us there in the future. Our policy consists of two elements: military power and sanctions. Sanctions and military power. We have no other policy. And I'm not so sure it would be any different were Biden and Blinken and Sullivan back in there. So we have become a pariah state, just like our little vacillating state in the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel, who is now, you probably know, 600 miles from any Israeli water, arresting people on boats in international waters because they're part of the flotilla coming to Gaza. You just can't be a bigger violator of what we always said was international law and what it means. So we're at a point right now where everything that I've said before about this geopolitical situation that is sweeping over the world and returning power to the East is accelerating to the extent that, we are going down much faster than I ever thought we would.
Larry, when it comes to the objectives of the attack, as you've mentioned, it could be imminent. It could be any time, any moment this week or in the coming days. What are the main objective if they go that way? You're talking about the ground invasion. It doesn't seem that would be likely, or that would be somehow in the mind of the people who are trying to restart the war. And the other point is what it seems to me that the blockade is failing, and the Trump administration, despite having this sort of rhetoric that is so successful, they're getting to the point to understand that the blockade is not working. That's why they need a new round of war. Your understanding of that?
You obviously haven't read my piece at sonar21.com. That's sonar21.com. Okay, look, this blockade is it's a charade. It's a complete made for TV, made to fool the United States citizens. It's not real. The U.S. Navy right now has deployed about you got 3 carrier strike groups, and each of those carrier strike groups carry they have between 3 and 4 ships, destroyers, cruisers. So let's go with 4 apiece. That's 12. Then you've got the 2 MEUs, which each MEU in this amphibious, they call it an ARG. I forget what the full acronym is, but they got 3
amphibious readiness group.
Amphibious readiness.
Yeah.
Okay. Amphibious readiness group. So they got 3 ships per each of those. And again, you take out the aircraft carriers and the carrier strike groups, because they're not going to pull up alongside some ship and board it. So basically, you got a total of about 11 ships that could be used to board a tanker or a cargo vessel. Well, the other thing is we're keeping the U.S. Navy 200 miles offshore of Iran. Okay, we're not getting inside that 200-mile barrier, because if they get close, they get shot. Well, so what does Iran do? Because you said we blockaded their ports. We haven't blockaded their ports. Nonsense. So the Iranian vessel comes out of port, whether it's Bandar Abbas or Karg Island. So it stays within the 12-mile limit of territorial waters. Okay, 12 miles out, plenty of depth. And so they're about 180 miles away from the nearest U.S. ship. Let's say the U.S. ship is then, the U.S. Navy is going to go, we're going to go get this tanker. They wait till it gets out of Iranian waters, maybe into Pakistani waters, and in theory, they go and they board it. Okay, once they board it, they either have to have a prize crew and a crew that takes control of the ship and sells it, or in any event, they have the ship that was used to basically stop the Iranian vessel. It stays with it until they get to wherever the port, wherever they're going with it. Well, if you've only got like 11 ships that are capable of doing that, that means you can stop 11 vessels. And since April 15th, there have been between 100 and 200 Iranian vessels coming out of the Gulf. The point is, we're only stopping maybe 10% on a good day, 3%. So like I said, it's complete utter bullshit what's being pushed. And there's Haig says, "Oh, we're tough and we got us the strongest ever and we're stopping," and then it's going to affect their economy. Give me a break. The number I heard yesterday was the oil that Iran had out on the open seas that had been sold, 150 million barrels of oil, selling at about $140 per barrel. Do the math. It's about $21 billion. Yeah, Scott Bessent, man, he's got his foot on the throat of the Iranian economy. That $21 billion. And I mean, it's just the United States is engaged in one of the greatest acts of mass delusion that I've ever seen.
On top of that, Nima, I'm coming back from the coffee shop this morning about 7 a.m. and I'm tuned into NPR, and the woman says there are still 2,000 plus ships stuck off the Strait of Hormuz with about 15,000 mariners on them, and they're starving. They don't have clean water to drink, and they don't have any place to go. So what are we doing? Yeah. But absolutely screwing up the world.
Yeah. Carol, there was a report on CBS. Here is what it says, that a major fire aboard USS Higgins disabled the ship, causing total power and propulsion loss. Incident happened in the Indo-Pacific region, but the exact location is undisclosed. No crew casualties so far. And this is part of that campaign against, that they're, because they're controlling Indo-Pacific. If you remember, one of these tankers, Iranian tankers, was seized in the Pacific. And I don't know how costly is this operation of the whole concept of blockade so far. It's unbelievable what's going on with that.
Well, the figure I got yesterday from the Pentagon was $28.7 billion so far. The question I asked simply was, how much does this war cost us to this point? I suspect that's about half of what the real cost is, but nonetheless, that's significant cost. So your point is made. And to what purpose? That's the big question. To what purpose? That's what the Congress should be asking. To what purpose are we spending all of this money? And why are we doing the war in the first place? Because there's not been a really good explanation yet. From Hegseth, from Bessent, from Trump himself, from J.D. Vance, there's not been a good explanation. We don't like Iran. Okay, that's not really a good strategic rationale.
It's something beyond that. Larry, since Carol just mentioned the budget, that the spending so far with this war, Pentagon said 2 days ago that it is $25 billion. But today we've learned from U.S. officials that that communicated with CBS News. They said it's $50 billion. Their estimation is 50. Yeah. It's twice what Pentagon had.
Yeah. That's probably closer.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the the rescue effort for the downed backseater on that F-15, is a special weapons officer or systems weapons officer, whatever they call it. We lost $500 million of planes on just that one day. 2 of the radars that Iran took out in the early days of this war were over $1 billion apiece right there. Reportedly, more than 49 aircraft have been shot or lost during this engagement. So, that probably, those aircraft total probably about $2-3 billion, right? So yeah, the numbers keep piling up, but what the hell do we care? It's a credit card and we don't have to pay the interest on it, or so we tell ourselves. This is like giving your kid goes to college, they get a credit card and they never have to pay the bill. So you look at the acceleration of the debt. When Donald Trump took office, the debt was at $37 trillion. by the end of December, it had gone up $1 trillion. And then in the next 77 days into 2026, it went up an additional trillion. So it's now 39 trillion. And if that trend line continues, I think by the end of May, end of June at the latest, we'll be up another $1 trillion. And so we'll be at 40. And so this is economically unsustainable. And so this is it's the economic side of this that's going to bring an end to U.S. military operations. The full weight of that has not hit yet. It's starting to hit, though, around the world, and it's creeping here into the United States. Just as the Trump administration opened up the strategic oil reserve and was pumping oil out to try to keep the oil prices down, gasoline prices down. That's now failed. So just in the last 3 days, the price of gas here, at least in Florida, it's gone up 40 cents. So it's going up about 10 to 20 cents a day.
Yeah, I run my Toyota Camry down to about half a tank before I fill it up. So several months ago, I was filling it up, fairly expensive filling station too for this area, for about $21, $22. I filled it up the other day with about the same amount of fuel. It was $52. That is going to eat into people's spending.
Yeah.
Colonel, Pete Hegseth was asked about the objectives of this second round of war, which was February 28th this year. And here is what he said.
Never haven't. So they haven't broken yet. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet for all of the.
Well, their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming my time for a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of.
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so
their facilities were bombed and obliterated. Their ambitions continued, and they're building a conventional shield.
Let me try again.
It's the North Korea strategy. You know this very well. The North Korea strategy was use conventional missiles to prevent anybody from.
Yeah, basically, what he's arguing, Colonel, is that they have destroyed, they have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program or that enriched uranium, but the ambitions were there, the desire was there. We were there to destroy the desire. How is that? That help him?
That's a casus belli, the desire. I would have loved to have been there at that moment when he said the example of North Korea, because I would have just come back with North Korea's got the bomb. I mean, what an example to use. North Korea's got the bomb. And North Korea told us they had the bomb when we went forward trying to entice them with an economic package to not get the bomb. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a war. We didn't even threaten a war. We essentially said, here's what you can have. This is a hugely generous package. And it was. It was amazing it got through Dick Cheney. I couldn't believe it got through Dick Cheney because we were going to give the North Koreans a whole new economy, a whole new relationship with the United States. Their response was, we got the bomb, dude.
Yeah.
Basically, this is the main sort of discussion right now in Iran, because many people believe that Iran needs some sort of deterrent because they don't believe that the United States or Israel would respect any sort of agreement. That's the majority of Iranians right now talking about what is the future of the nuclear program of Iran if they decide to attack us again and again, if nobody cares about these attacks.
Well, given the track record of both countries, Israel and the United States, how could you come to any other conclusion, really?
Yeah.
Larry, you remember when this war started, Europeans were totally, at least, Merz in Germany was saying, they're doing our dirty job. Let's do regime change in Iran. Right now, he's totally against, somehow he has some sort of huge differences with Donald Trump because he put something out and Donald Trump responding to him. But after all, looking at the situation with the way that the United States pushed the whole Iranian sort of public opinion toward what would be the future for them, how do you understand that?
Well, the United States we failed to learn any lessons from history, for starters. The thing I've become sort of obsessed with this week has been a reaction to Trump's claim that the Iranian leadership is in disarray, that there's nobody in charge. And this is not something that Trump came up with on his own. This is, I believe, Israeli intelligence that's been transmitted via liaison channels, and the majority in the Trump cabinet have bought onto this. They say, "Oh yeah, that's true," because then when I started looking at it in depth, Pezeshkian, Arachi, Galibaf, the Ayatollah himself, Mujtaba Khamenei, and then the head of the IRGC. Turns out all five were IRGC in the Iraq War. Now, Pezeshkian was actually, he was regular army, but he was a medic. And they assigned him to work exclusively with the IRGC. So he was treating and saving the lives of IRGC folks. My point in all of this is that all of these guys who are in leadership positions, they come out of the same background. They didn't serve in necessarily the same exact unit, but they all fought. And four of them are combat veterans. And, we ought to put that into the context of remembering our greatest generation that were combat veterans, how they interacted with each other. It wasn't one of great division. And so this tells me that right now, Iran actually has probably the strongest, most unified set of leaders that it's had in its history. And we better damn well take that into account, because the notion that they're weak, the notion that they're confused or frightened. I mean, these guys have been to war. Donald Bone Spurs Trump has not, okay? He found ways to avoid service. Hegseth is the only one in the group that has actually had some military experience, and obviously he didn't learn much from it. So the United States is grossly underestimated the nature of the Iranian leadership, and then the effect that the U.S. attack has had on the Iranian people. Instead, I think John Kiriakou commented the other day, he was watching one of the videos, and there was Iranians in the street waving flags in favor. It was a protest in support of the government, or not we got to find another word for it. It wasn't a protest. It was a rally. And the camera focused on this one, let's call her a lady. If she would have been a poster girl for a lesbian gathering, she was very butch, exhibited some masculine features. She's the kind of person that probably 3 months ago would have been an opponent of the Iranian regime. And she's out in support, rallying for the Iranian regime. That's the kind of effect we've had on the Iranian people. And Trump and his advisors, they don't understand that.
It reminds me of Neiman when I actually saw these photographs. When Bill Clinton ordered the bombing of Serbia, 78 days ultimately, we went after the main bridge there in Belgrade and just relentlessly striking it with bombs. And the second day, they showed a video of Serbs standing on the bridge, extending the middle finger as the jets rolled in.
Colonel, what amazes me basically when it comes to IRGC, the understanding mostly in the West is that IRGC is some sort of institution, some sort of class in Iran, within the Iranian society, that they're different from other part of the society, which exactly the opposite. They're basically, they have each and every class in the society, Iran has a representative in IRGC. It seems like you say, American Navy is different from American people. American Air Force is different from American. It's just unbelievable. I don't know how is that even possible to think this way.
Well, that's the way we do wars, generally speaking, Nima. Even if we win them, we type classify everybody the same. The Advir, the Wehrmacht, the SS, they're all the same. The dirty Hun. It's a necessity to a certain extent, especially when you're involved in what might be an existential war. But it's never really true, as you just indicated. Another thing I would point out, though, and this is the other side of the coin, if you will. I read the report about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I guess now, maybe a little longer. A report well done, participated in by some Iranians in Iran at the University of Iran. And the report showed how much money oil sales generated for Iran on a fiscal year basis in US dollars. And then it showed how much the IRGC took out of that. Fabulous amount of money. They were taking about 1/4 of the Iranian budget, most of it generated from oil sales, oil and gas. And the implication was strong when you just did simple things like analyze the number of people in the IRGC leadership and the amount of money being essentially taken away from the Iranian government, which could have been used for social programs, for food, any number of things that would have benefited the Iranian people, was going to the IRGC. And then when you read further into the analysis, it wasn't going to the rank and file of the IRGC, it was going to the leadership. So that is a problem within the chemistry, if you will, I suspect, of Iran. But back to our original point, when you bomb people, you do away with considerations like that. Franklin Roosevelt put Lucky Luciano in charge of the wharfs in New York so that he didn't have a problem with the wharf workers and the dock workers and everything. Later gave him Cuba. You got to use what you got to use is my point. But bombs fuse everybody. Doesn't matter whether there's a problem between this element or that element. When you start bombing someone, you are doing them a favor, actually, in terms of their solidity, their cohesiveness in opposing you. It's utterly stupid what we've done. If I could give you a plan for waging war against Iran that would be 100% different than what we're doing right now, and might have a remote possibility of actually bringing them to the negotiating table. But we aren't even anywhere near that. We're not anywhere, because we don't have anybody, Nima, in charge who has a brain.
Yeah. Larry, what do you make of the phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin right after the meeting he had with the Iranian foreign minister? It seems that it was Vladimir Putin who called Donald Trump, because Russian sources are saying that and he initiated the call with Donald Trump, Putin, and your understanding of that.
Yeah, it was a direct result of meeting with Arachi on Monday, and the message that was conveyed to Donald Trump is basically keep your damn hands off of Iran. If you put ground forces in, you're going to have a problem with us. That was the message, based on Yuri Ushakov gave a briefing to the press yesterday. So it was described as a friendly call, but it was a call putting Trump and company on that Russia has the full backing. They are behind Iran 100% in this. So it's one other thing for Trump to think about. Frankly, I don't think Trump even takes it seriously, or that it's going to affect his judgment. I think he's off in a completely different dimension. So, but he took the phone call. Putin delivered the message, and this is only the second time that actually Putin has initiated a phone call. So that shows, from the Russian standpoint, it was a priority, and we'll see. Right now, the entire military U.S. military posture in the region. It's locked and loaded. It's just a matter of Trump saying, "Okay, go or don't go," and we'll find out. One thing that would tell us that he's going to back away is if he started withdrawing troops, but that's not what's happening. They're flowing more troops, more resources into the region. So that just tells me this is not an intimidation tactic. This is they're actually going to launch, even though the military advisors have counseled against it. Trump once again is going to ignore what the military has told him, and he's going to make matters worse.
Nima, if they abandoned every other war plan in the Pentagon that's on the shelf for potential execution, there are different shelves for them. That is to say, the ones that are on the shelf for execution are already virtually tip-fitted and tip-fiddled and ready to go. If they executed every single one of those with the military power behind it, combined, and did it against Iran, they couldn't beat Iran.
Right.
So this is a joke. This is a complete joke. It's going to get a lot of people, if it materializes, it's going to get a lot of people killed on both sides. Going to get a lot of GIs, a lot of Marines, a lot of special operators killed. Going to destroy billions of dollars worth of equipment. At the end of the day, the Strait of Hormuz is still going to be more or less controlled by Iran. And if Iran wants to go to its second tier of targets, then we're in recession in June and depression by September. The globe, including America.
Yeah.
This is insanity. Insanity is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Larry, how much of what's going on and the chance of having or the risk of having some sort of escalation is related to the situation of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel? Because the latest poll is showing that the opposite, his rivals are getting the momentum in Israel. So is Donald Trump going to save him by new attacks, by new round of attack? And the other point is the situation in the southern part of Lebanon and the use of FPV drones. They're using that successfully to put pressure on Israel.
Well, that was the point I was going to make, that the report yesterday is several brigades. Israel's withdrawing several brigades from southern Lebanon. So this appears to be a repeat of 2006, where they tried to get to the Litani River, couldn't. Hezbollah stopped them, and then Israel basically started withdrawing because it was taking too many casualties. It has taken, I would estimate, they've at least doubled, if not tripled, the casualties this time compared to 2006. So it really it's become a costly affair. Now, ask yourself, where did Hezbollah get those FPV drones? Huh. The busy beavers in their workshops underground making them? Or is it possible, conceivable, that Iran supplied them with the drones? But we were told, we've got rid of Bashar al-Assad. We've destroyed the ability of Iran to resupply Hezbollah. We've killed all the Hezbollah leadership. We gave them those exploding phones and pagers. Hezbollah is devastated. Yeah, now Hezbollah is kicking Israeli ass right and left and forcing them to, they have been unable to achieve their military objectives other than destroying every village that's right along the border, leveling it. But that as it's the Stalingrad effect. When the Germans blew up Stalingrad, they created some natural defenses for the Russian, then Soviet forces, and so the same sort of phenomenon has happened here. That they create more cover and concealment that the Hezbollah folks can use to attack Israelis. So this is Netanyahu doesn't have it. He can't point to a victory anywhere. They're getting beat up in southern Lebanon because Iran was still able over land to resupply Hezbollah and keep Hezbollah current with the latest, greatest technology, not something old and outdated. He's failed to suppress and control Gaza, and now they failed to in Iran. So he's got, he's 3 times a loser and that's going to affect the vote, I'm sure, because he may be desperate to try for another Hail Mary to knock out the Iranians, but it's not going to succeed.
Plus, the vaunted control over the IDF armored and ground forces in general is shattering. If you listen to some of the remarks that are being made by intermediate leaders, even the head of the IDF as he is right now, if you listen to those and you read Haaretz closely in the way the articles parse some of this, Israel's armed forces are falling apart. They're falling apart. They're doing things that even they are not supposed to be doing. And principally, the reason they're looking at that as a negative, the leadership, is because that's harming their ability to do their mission in Lebanon, because they're going berserk. And you wouldn't blame them for going berserk if you saw the PTSD rate and you saw the suicide rate, and that's available. You can query the IDF headquarters. They will tell you what the suicide rate is and what the post-traumatic stress rate is. It's off the charts. It's terrible. So their military is actually disintegrating, and they don't want that to happen. So I'm sure they're saying up, hey, we got to stop this, or we got to do something differently. Let's stop and hold the line at the river or whatever. Let's don't do any more of this north of the river because we're destroying the armed forces.
Yeah, remember they said their original objective is to get to the Litani. They wanted to secure all the territory south of the Litani. They haven't. I don't think they penetrated more than 5 kilometers into Lebanon right now. They're still stuck along that border region, and Hezbollah once again has proven to be effective defenders. And then they upped their game technologically with the drone. They didn't have drones 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now they are effectively using those drones. It's like you don't need a suicide bomber. You just send the drone.
One of the articles in Haaretz was by a former IDF officer, and he said, how come we didn't understand drones?
Yeah, it's not like there's been anything else going on in the world where they might have learned some lessons.
Yeah.
But again, this goes to the heart of the Israelis. They're the biggest bunch of arrogant pricks I've ever been involved with. I mean, they assume they know everything. The attitude is what drives you crazy. When you've got an attitude that you know it all, that you're the best, and that nobody can teach you anything, great. You set yourself up for getting your ass handed to you, like what's happening to them in Lebanon.
And another phenomenon is that the Lebanese people, who have nothing to do with Hezbollah, in most cases, they're just business people or they're citizens, they're getting angry now. They're getting very angry with their own government, but they're getting particularly angry with the IDF.
Yeah, I mean, remember, the U.S. plan is to try to use Lebanon to attack Hezbollah. And frankly, I don't think the Lebanese, they've been involved with the civil war now for, good luck, 40, 50, 51 years.
Yeah.
It started in 1975. At some point, they're going to wake up and realize they got to stop being played by these outside forces.
One of my particular friends in Beirut said, in a moment of exasperation, I wish the Syrians had come back.
Yeah.
At least they police a little bit.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. Today in the Israeli media, they were talking about the situation is so strange right now because we have the ceasefire. They're telling us, Israelis, we have the ceasefire, but the situation for Israel in the northern part of Israel is getting worse because they were trying, because one of the main objectives of Benjamin Netanyahu, you remember that since the October the 7th, they were talking about, we want to send the people, Israeli people, to the northern part. And so far, it seems that the situation is getting worse, despite having, they have destroyed many villages in the southern part of Lebanon. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're gaining some sort of land. They're gaining some sort of momentum because Hezbollah is fighting back. But not only in the southern part of Lebanon, Colonel, in the northern part of Israel. And I don't know if there is a solution in their mind for that.
No, and I understand they've started to move again. They started to move internal to Israel because their lives are untenable in that northern area. And they're angry. They're very angry. So all of this is building, but I take exception to what you said earlier. I'm hearing that Naftali Bennett and Lapid, they don't have a chance. They don't have a chance. They're stupid. They're not good politicians like Bibi Netanyahu is. I may be wrong, maybe listening to the wrong people, but and then the other thing is they tell me there's not 2 cents worth of difference in the way they feel about what Netanyahu is doing as being essential to Israel's future.
But, you know, the latest report, as Barak Ravid reported, that it says the new poll shows that Bennett is ahead of Netanyahu. I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm what I'm saying is it doesn't matter, I don't think, because they're just as bad as he.
Yeah, because the 80% of Israelis, they want to get to the fight again, and they're supporting what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Lebanon.
And the West Bank, too. They're all for what's going on in the West Bank.
Yeah. And Larry, it doesn't seem that anytime soon they're going to change the mindset. I don't know if they know, because today I was talking with the Master Chas Freeman, what the point that he's mentioned that is, I think is so important, that many people who live in Israel, they don't know the scale of destruction that has happened during the war between Iran and Israel. And they don't have this national picture of what has happened to Israel. That's why they're feeling getting back.
Most of them are underground. Most of them are underground.
Yeah. How is that going to be understandable for the Benjamin Netanyahu and Israelis right now, Larry? This connection, as Ambassador Chas Freeman was mentioning.
Well, if the war restarts, if they renew the attack on Iran, Iran has vowed that it's going to hit both the U.S. and Israel harder than they did during the first 5 weeks. Now, I don't know what that means, but there will be more. I guess Iran avoided taking out the power system in Israel, and if they attack that at all in Iran, then Iran will retaliate, reciprocate, and at that point, the Israelis deprived of electricity, it will be a big issue. So, I keep in mind that Israel is it's a small country compared to Iran. I mean, tiny, and it's like if you have a 1,000 bombs that you can drop. And Israel has 1,000 bombs. Iran has 1,000 bombs. The Iranian 1,000 bombs are going to have much more effect in Israel than the Israeli 1,000 bombs will have in Iran, simply because they're dropped in a much smaller area. And so, whereas Iran is 2.5 times the size of Texas, is said. I think it's like 10,000 times the size of Israel. So. What you're looking here is that the Israeli public has yet to suffer the full effects of war. And it's only going to be when they finally start suffering the full effects of war that they may finally get some motivation to change their politics. But, up to this point, they've been very, it's like you get rid of Netanyahu, you still got the Israeli policy of wanting to destroy and eliminate the Palestinians. So that's why I think that there's not an electoral solution to this yet in Israel.
And the sad thing about it, Nima, in a political as well as an existential sense, Israel has no place to go if it's defeated. It has no place to go. There's no Nuremberg tribunal set up to officiate, even if it's on the negative side for the one side and positive for the other. There's nothing. They're done. They're finished. There's no place for them to go. The world won't accept them anywhere else. So where are they going to go?
Yeah, well, and the other thing,
Maybe one state solution would be helpful.
Well, I've been saying that all along. If they want to be a democracy, a real democracy, however flawed, and accept Christians and Arabs, including Palestinian Arabs and others in the region, that's a different deal altogether. They could survive, but not as this apartheid hell-bent to kill everybody who even looks like he's not a Jew state. They're not going to survive.
Well, and Israel is really doing, I guess, pouring gasoline on the fire of anti-Israeli sentiment.
Yes.
It started last week with the Israeli soldier defacing a crucifix, pounding the head of Jesus with a sledgehammer. Then another video has gone viral of one of these settlers runs up and attacks a French nun who's in the West Bank. So all of this attack on Christians, it's starting to resonate within the Christian world that in the past was very supportive of Israel. And now they're beginning to see just, the story of the crucifixion of Jesus and the Jewish establishment being the ones yelling for his crucifixion. We find out that's not a historical fable. That's reality.
Yeah. Carol, looking at the 3 steps of Iranian plan, it seems that Iran has updated, the latest version, but it's not that much different from what it was before. And the first step is putting an end to the war permanently between Iran and the United States, between Israel and Lebanon. I think that's whoever came with this plan is somehow genius, because if they don't, it never happens. And it seems that's why I think Iranians are feeling so comfortable with this status quo, with the current situation, because they see that the blockade is not working. They have failed to do regime change in Iran. And they're just before, I remember, in the first term of the Trump administration, they put a lot of pressure on Iranian economy. Before getting out, Donald Trump withdrawing from JCPOA, Iran was exporting something like 2 million barrels, 2.5 million barrels per day. And then Donald Trump reduced that to 700 or 400,000 barrels a day. That was a huge problem in those days. We're right now, we had a war. We had a full-out war between the United States and Iran. And they're not even close to the worst situation they had before in the first administration. And that's why I think they can manage this. They feel that they can manage this situation with the United States, considering all these sort of nonsense, in my opinion, blockade that Donald Trump is bragging about.
Yeah, if I were the Iranian leadership, I would reconsider what, if I've heard accurately, what their second tier of ballistic missile primarily targeting is. I would go back to the original conception. If they feel they've got to go a second round, the original conception was hit U.S. targets only in the region. Prince Sultan, up there in the northern Iraq, Al Udeid, Bahrain, Fifth Fleet headquarters, and so forth. Hit only U.S. installations, U.S. people in the region. Not all this massive damage that they could do to the global infrastructure in terms of oil and helium and urea, you name it. But just keep their hold on the strait the way they have it now, and just keep pounding the hell out of the United States wherever they exist in the area. I might even extend it to the Bright Star Preparation Center in Egypt. Let Egypt know that you can reach out to them too. But don't go that hugely, hugely damaging to the world economy tier of targets. It'll get the world's attention. There's no question about it. But I think it would do as much damage, if not more, to Iran in the process as it would do to the United States. And we need to bring this to some sort of realization in Washington that this is not worth it. It is not going to result in success. It's going to result in the exact opposite. And let's stop this. And you take those 10 points, and if you just isolate on those points that are so critical, like relief from primary and secondary sanctions, something I might add, Obama never did. Go back and look at the JCPOA. We were well into it, and we hadn't lifted much at all. And we weren't going to lift because Obama didn't have the support of the Congress. So you got to have that in there too. But I think if you did that and you did the business of nuclear, the nuclear business, and you simply said what we said in the JCPOA, I might even lighten up on it a little bit. And you granted the other points of the 10 that are grantable and aren't exceedingly stupid for us to let them have. And I'm really going over the 10 points in my mind right now. I'm not sure I could think of any of them that are that bad. You could probably come to a close that would not be a victory for the United States. It certainly would be a victory for Iran, but it would be a better situation than we're going to have if we go at it whole hog, both sides. But what's the world usually do? What usually happens in a situation like this? Both sides go at it whole hog, and we wind up bleeding, and the United States winds up taking, I think, the bigger blow.
Of course, it looks like Iran has really toughened up its position. That one of the messages that was delivered to Washington by the Pakistanis over the weekend, when Irakchi was going to Islamabad, then Muscat, and went back, was that, we are signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Unlike Israel, we allow IAEA inspections. So going forward, we're not going to negotiate on any question of enrichment. That's on the back burner now. That's not even going to be one of the critical issues for us. And they said we have a right to determine what our nuclear policy is going to be, because we're living up to international law, and so we're not going to surrender our sovereignty on that. That is a tougher position than what they had before.
And were I Iran and I involved in this business, and you really were doing some negotiating, and I don't know whom you would negotiate with because we don't have any diplomats, I would bring Israel into it, especially if Israel is really hard pressed, as it is going to be. It is already, as Larry pointed out. I'd say, okay, Israel gives up everything it has, everything except the civilian program. And it puts itself under the NPT additional protocols and everything else we put ourselves under. And it's subject to inspections. In fact, we could have the inspections two-tiered. They'll go to one place 1 week, and then they'll go to the other place the next week. I'd be clever about it. Let's eliminate this other problem that the Omani foreign minister said was the real problem in Southwest Asia.
I think that would be helpful, because just imagine all of these countries, not only Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they're all mostly concerned about Israel's capabilities when it comes to the nuclear weapons. So if you put some sort of pressure on Israel to give up or to control their nuclear program, that would be hugely, hugely influential in the whole region.
Yeah. And what does a truly democratic country accepting all citizens need with nuclear weapons in that region? I mean, what do they need with them?
Find affordable housing near you. Select your state.
Larry, UAE has left OPEC, and they're leaving GCC, and it's a new era for UAE. This country has failed to somehow, they were struggling to survive because of the war. What has happened, they were running out of cash. The situation, the economy had a huge challenges. That's why they tried to get closer to the United States, communicate with the United States that if you don't help us, we're going to get closer to China. We're going to use yuan. And right now they have decided to get out of OPEC and to get out of GCC countries, to have some sort of more freedom when it comes to the producing oil or exporting oil. What is happening to UAE, Larry?
UAE's behavior right now reminds me of an architect firm that was in the South Tower of the World Trade Center after it had been hit with a plane. And and you go into their office, and what are they working on? Oh, they're working on remodeling some of the floors above them. Good luck with that plan, because it's completely irrelevant. You know, we're leaving OPEC. How much oil are you guys pumping right now? Well, none. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really going to hurt OPEC. I think you got a bigger problem than that. We're going to pull out from the Gulf, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, and we're going to align ourselves with Israel. Oh, that's a good idea. They're so popular. Israel's so influential in the world today. I mean, this is a country that's committing suicide because they got bigger problems than some analysts say, oh, this is going to help the United States control, not be held hostage to OPEC pricing, and how it's going to affect the price of oil going forward. Meanwhile, nobody in the West is paying attention to what's actually happening in the oil market today, what's actually happening to the economy, the economic impact that is a result of the Gulf, of the Persian Gulf being shut down now for 60 days. It's the divorce from reality. That's why it's like Nero working on his fiddle playing while Rome is burning. UAE pulls out of OPEC. UAE may not exist in a year if this trend line continues. Because they are heavily dependent upon the free trade market, the free trade zone in Jebel Ali. So that's been closed. They were their financial industry, with the major U.S. financial centers putting operations in that country. They're dead. They're down. They're not operating. The real estate market, it's dead. You don't see that they really created. Part of their strategy was to create this exotic mix of Las Vegas and Disney World.
You can work full-time with confidence while on SSDI. All SUP employment services is authorized by the
and between Dubai and Abu Dhabi that would attract all these foreigners and bring their foreign currency with them. Well, most of those foreigners are getting the hell out. They're not sticking around. So UAE has no future, and yet it's now said, yeah, we're going to pull out of OPEC, and we're going to divorce ourselves from the other Arab countries in the region. Yeah, good. Why don't you start taking hits of fentanyl while you're at it? That'll be good.
Little Sparta is looking more and more like the Sparta of old.
Yeah.
Colonel, Politico reported that Trump's call to reduce American troops in Germany shocks Pentagon. And who's Pentagon? He's talking about, they're talking about Pete Hegseth. I don't see Pete Hegseth getting, being shocked or surprised by these sort of decisions on the part of Donald Trump.
Well, I guarantee the uniformed officers underneath him will be, especially the uniformed officers who owe their stars to being in NATO or in Europe or both. That is the cushiest, I can't say that word, job in the American military. And it has got perks going out the yin-yang with it. And look what it does to the Europeans, too. I mean, think about this for a minute. I've actually had people at NATO headquarters relate this to me. Every time we send a 3-star, they get another 3-star. Every time we send a 4-star, they get another 4-star. They don't need them, but they have to have an equivalent with the big partner. So this is so rank heavy, so top heavy, so bloated in Europe, but it's cushiony. It's wonderful. It's great to have a tour there. It doesn't matter whether you're in Heidelberg or Ramstein or Stuttgart or wherever you might be. So the leadership of the Pentagon would be horrified if we were to shut down most of the U.S. presence in Europe, particularly in Germany. Very cushiony there, very cushiony.
Larry, you and I were talking about NATO for such a long time since the war in Ukraine started.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he just threw me out for no reason.
Care. It seems that the hatred toward Russia is getting stronger instead of being weaker and getting weaker. And on the other hand, you see the situation with Israel and the Middle East is worsening as we talk. And the situation in the Middle East as well. You've mentioned UAE, Saudi Arabia and UAE. They're hating each other. We have to accept that. Not hating each other, but they're fighting each other, at least, if we can put it this way. Yeah. What Donald Trump has created so far for himself.
Well, there's no leadership, no leadership and vision. You'd think the United States would want to, build alliances. And Trump's mission in life to see how many people he can alienate, and again, I attribute that to his own current mental decline. So. The way the trend lines are running is there is going to be a global conflagration. Russia has already now changed its language vis-a-vis Europe or NATO as a whole, which includes the United States. When Lavrov announced last week, we are at war, he didn't say we could be going to war or there's the risk of going to war. No, he said we are at war with NATO. Now, that word has not yet translated into action, which means military strikes on European targets. But if the Europe continues to, the different European countries continue to supply drones and attack sensitive targets inside Russia, Russia's going to retaliate, and they're going to hit targets in Europe, and then this thing's going to escalate.
Yeah, it's true.
Basically, keep your damn hands off of Iran. I don't think Trump's going to pay attention to that warning. He's ignored. He's already showed that the decision to launch the attack on Iran on February 28th, the majority of his advisors counseled against it. He ignored his advisors. So he's just going to do what he wants to do, what he thinks is right. So instead of easing these tensions, the tensions are they're going to escalate. And yet the irony of it is, particularly Europe is at the weakest point that it ever has been, in 500 years. They don't have the military. They have the pretension of military strength. They think, we're powerful, but they're not. They've shrunken. Just one example of that is look at the UK and now Milei, the president of Argentina, is talking about retaking the Falkland Islands, Las Malvinas. The Argentines always say Las Malvinas son nuestras. The Malvinas Islands are ours. It was 46 years ago, roughly, that the UK was able to mount a military effort to go down and kick the Argentinians out of the Malvinas and call it the Falklands. They couldn't do that today. Couldn't do it at all. They don't have the naval power. They don't have the military, the army, capable of doing it. So, and that same pattern has repeated itself across Europe, across Germany, France, Italy. And so they're a shadow of their former selves, but they keep looking in the mirror thinking that they are the best, the brightest, really quite capable. And so when you've got that belief that you're invincible and you act according to that belief, but it turns out you don't actually have the capabilities, it ends disastrously. And on top of that, then with this economic, at a minimum, it's a recession. And I think Colonel Wilkerson's right. We're going to be closer. It will be a depression, a global depression. When that hits with the full force, these countries, they're not going to have the resources to build up their military.
I think, Nima, what we had after the recession, then depression that commenced in 29, took on great weight in 32, brought Roosevelt to the presidency in 33. Think about what we had after that. And think about what Larry was just saying. We are, the escalation ladder is up against the side of the global barn.
Yeah.
The rungs are labeled Arctic, Baltic, Ukraine, Georgia, Iran, and I probably missed a couple. We're already on the rungs. And at the top is the nuclear holocaust. That's not where we want to go, but that's where we're going. That's where we're going. We're going into global conflict. It's going to be creepingly, and then it's going to be disaster.
Larry, before wrapping up, just the final question is that when you look at Zelensky, because Zelensky is somehow the government, or let's put it this way, the people, the administration, Zelensky administration in Ukraine somehow connects what's going on in Europe to what's going on in the Middle East, because they were there in Syria, if you remember, and training these Daesh or HTC forces to attack Syria. And right now they're in Saudi Arabia and some Gulf states. It seems that they're trying to improve their capabilities in order to go to fight drones. I don't know what is the capabilities of Ukraine to help them with the case of drones.
Well, I don't think it's a significant capability. I was going to add, don't forget Mali. They're down mucking around in Mali as well. So right now you've got the proxy forces, but Ukraine, Ukraine militarily cannot sustain itself. Right now the Russians have the spring offensive has started, and they are moving rapidly on several fronts. They breached a significant defensive line outside of Sumy. And then in Zaporizhia, they've also had a breakthrough. So those are, but nobody's paying attention anymore. So this has been, I think, Zelensky's quest to try to remain relevant. His offer to, with their expertise in drones, they don't have a massive industrial drone operation. They got more mom and pop shops, and now are relying upon European production facilities. It's quite different from what the Russians have. So the limited, I call it the limited expertise they have with drones. It's not going to be a game changer for any of these other countries. It's just, I think it's more of a Zelensky's attempt to try to remain relevant, because nobody's paying much attention to him anymore.
And he hates that. He absolutely hates that.
Yeah. Just Netanyahu is right at the center, and Zelensky is just fading away.
Yeah. Well, you saw again, you got curious relationships. A Russian ship loaded with Ukrainian grain pulled up and delivered it to Israel last week. It drove the Ukrainians nuts.
Don't you unload that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're out there in the Mediterranean, 600 nautical miles away from our territorial waters, arresting all these people on boats in international waters, or in some cases, even in the territorial waters of Greece.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl and Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Coffee. Follow me.